Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, November 18th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, visiting us in studio, the Director of Research for Future Now, Aaron Kleinman, will be here. And whether Trump is hurting red state Republican elections and what it means for state legislatures in 2020. Meanwhile, John Bell Edwards wins in Louisiana, saving health care for 500,000 people. The Bolivian coup turns even uglier as all elected members of Evo Morales' party are threatened with arrest because democracy. It was a crime. It was a moral disaster. Now, a trove of leaked Iranian cables show just what a strategic F-up the Iraq War was. Meanwhile, impeachment support builds. Hearings to continue this week. And Barack Obama introduces the audacity of nope. Meanwhile, in the wake of falsely attributing black leadership support for his Douglas plan, Pete Buttigieg, of course, takes the lead in Iowa. Chris Coons gets a well-deserved primary. Donald Trump visits the hospital for an unscheduled, unannounced visit, which was, of course, perfectly routine. So concerned about being in peak physical top shape.
Healthiest president ever.
I just want to be optimal. Trump issues pardons to convicted and accused war criminals, of course. And tomorrow, big Red for Ed action in Indiana. Over half the teachers, maybe more even. We could talk to a statistician about whether half the teachers or maybe more is really redundant. Will be involved in a labor action in Indiana. All this and more on today's program. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. We are all here. Michael continues his extended jaunt across the country. I know he was on TYT last week. He's tweeting awfully early this morning from LA, presumably, right? I don't know. That was weird, but I don't know. I just want to just note the effort involved with someone getting up so early to spread the truth on Twitter in West Coast time. Meanwhile, everyone else is here in studio. And just a reminder, there are, in fact, people associated with the show who are getting up at that time to do news. And they put out the AM Quickie, which is a 5-minute headlines of the day's political news that you are going to want to know. So when you walk into the office, nobody's going to hit you with the, did you hear about that? And you don't know what they're talking about. And then, of course, it sets it up nicely. You will hear more depth to those stories on this program. Sometimes we don't cover all of the stuff. We do our best. AM Quickie, you can sign up at amquickie.com right now. You can find it on any of your most popular podcast servers. I think you can get it via the Alexa. I tried to do something. I'm not sure what happened. I don't know if that actually worked. But maybe I'll hire somebody to do that. That might be a good idea. In the meantime, also just remember this program is supported by folks like you. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Let's jump right into this. Over the weekend, I think we reported on Friday that the Republican National Committee was dumping $1 million in the last couple of days, maybe like the last day of the governor's race in Louisiana. It's a red state. I think largely people thought that John Bel Edwards would lose. Now, look, he's not my favorite flavor of Democrat. He's probably my least favorite flavor of Democrat, or, well, maybe not, but close. But the difference is, the material difference, the bottom line one, the first one, is that 500,000 people who were allowed to jump on the Medicaid rolls as part of the ACA because he was governor of that state will keep their health insurance, which was likely to have gone away had John Bel Edwards not won. And we will be talking about this with our guest in a moment. But the other thing that's clear is that despite the tremendous reluctance that Nancy Pelosi exhibited, and to some extent still exhibits by narrowing the scope of this impeachment hearing, presumably because impeachment was going to motivate Republican voters beyond their already fairly motivated selves, that it would overwhelm Democrats. The thing that's clear over the elections that have happened in the past couple of weeks is that that's not in play. We can't measure what a lack of impeachment hearing would have done to Democratic turnout, but there's no evidence that it's necessarily juiced it more, but it certainly hasn't suppressed it either. And all the other arguments for impeachment stand. And here's Donald Trump. They're not wearing read the transcript T-shirts behind him. Apparently that was a bit of a flop last time.
Those didn't do as well as the hats did.
No. And, but here he is on stage. He's at a political rally in Bossier City, Louisiana. Bossier City. I've been corrected by our guest. Louisiana. I like to call it Bossier. Bossier or Bossier. Bossier or Bossier. Sometimes they like to call it Bossier City in Louisiana. Just 4 days ago, this was a day before the election. And here he is explaining why Republicans should come out and vote for his candidate of choice.
In Kentucky, we elected everybody. The governor got brought up in a few short days, 19 points. I went, we made a speech, the whole ticket was there. Everybody won big. Governor's a really good guy. But 19 points is a big thing, and he lost by just a few thousand votes. And the headlines the next day, Trump took a loss. I lift him up a lot. So Trump took a loss, so you got to give me a big win, please, okay? Okay?
He's really getting like styly now with this stuff. Like, you got to give me a little big, like he's getting, like he's really doing like he's doing like what a radio host does.
He's being real cute.
Real cute. Well, that did not work out. He did not get a big win. He did not get a small win. He did not get a win in Louisiana. And like I say, the most important thing about that is that 500,000 people will continue to get their health care. And in a moment, we will talk to our guest about the question of redistricting. They did not, Republicans failed to get a supermajority in the legislature, which would have been a guarantee that they're going to redistrict in a horrible way. However, I think North Carolina gave us an example of just how Democrats aren't necessarily on board with the best redistricting or the most judicious one that we might want, because they're individual politicians who have their own agendas. And we will talk about that in a moment. In the meantime, that bell means that someone has just got their wings, and maybe they have also perhaps purchase something from grove.co. What is grove.co? Well, they offer healthy, plant-based, non-toxic cleaning products that work. The good ones are actually, more enjoyable to use because you're not worried about, oh, am I poisoning my child? Oh, am I poisoning my cat or my dog? Where do you start and who do you trust in terms of these type of cleaners? Like I say, Grove Collaborative. It's an online marketplace. They do all the curation. They deliver all natural home, beauty, personal care products, and they deliver it directly to you. They take the guesswork out of going green because every Grove product is guaranteed to be good for you, your family, your home, and the planet. What is it? What's the name of that? The soap that I like. What is it? No. The one in the bathroom. The one without the
Meyer's?
scent. No. The one in the bath. Forget it. It's well documented that I don't know if it's documented, that I have a problem with senses, and with smells. And so I like to get a specific type of soap that is, I'm trying to find it right now. Hold on one second. It is, it's basically soap that has no dyes, it's like I can't remember. It's the clear one. Seventh generation. That's what it is. I use it for my hands. I use it for the dish soap, and I get it super quick via the Grove. They have a bunch of other stuff too, like great sponges and whatnot, but Grove is super helpful because there's so many different natural products out there. I don't have time to go, frankly, research it. I have other things to do. Meanwhile, we're coming up on the holidays. That means that your house is going to get messy, or you're going to have folks over and you want to make it clean. The Grove has amazing limited time festive scents to make your house clean and smell amazing. The site's super easy to use. You can set up recurring shipments, so you don't even have to think about it anymore once you figure out how much toilet paper am I using, how much towels, that type of thing. And then it shows up at your front door. For a limited time, when listeners go to grove.co/majority, you're going to get a free 5-piece gift set from Mrs. Meyer's in festive holiday scents like peppermint or Iowa pine. The pine I can do. Go to grove.co/majority to get this exclusive holiday offer. It's grove.co/majority. Also, I think a lot of people go through with this. You have an important day. Maybe you're coming on a show. And then it turns out, pimple. Sorry. Oh, no. Yeah. We don't do makeup around here. So you got to come in with your best game face. And but with Proactiv MD, you got a solution. It's America's #1 acne brand. Proactiv has helped fight acne for almost 25 years, and now they've introduced their next generation acne treatment, Proactiv MD, which contains a dermatologist-recommended topical retinoid called adapalene. I first heard about that from my father-in-law, former father-in-law. I don't know. We still haven't figured out what I call him, who is a dermatologist. And this is the newest acne-fighting innovation that's been made available over-the-counter consumers in over 30 years. Kelly, big, long time, she doesn't like it when I call her old Kelly. Formerly Kelly here. Former producer Kelly. Producer really emeritus. I mean, she still actually does some work for us. She says that she's been using Proactiv on and off since high school. The formula has improved over the years, but the idea has remained the same. Proactiv is a program of skincare that gives you short and long-term results. It's the best acne-fighting product that doesn't require a prescription, and it's been that way for a long time. I have sensitive skin, she writes. Proactiv's program has made my skin smoother, clearer, without causing redness or peeling. It only takes a few weeks to achieve noticeable differences in your skin. Confidence makes all the difference. And going back to school or going into work or whatever it is, leaves one less thing to worry about. Proactiv is so reliable. It fights acne, improves the brightness and overall appearance of my skin. It's the best regimen I've ever used. So says producer emeritus Kelly. And right now, our listeners can go to proactiv.com/majority, receive an exclusive on-the-go bag, which features Proactiv's T-Zone Oil Absorber, Body Acne Wipes, and Green Tea Moisturizer. That's close to $100 value. There's a 60-day money-back guarantee. Again, that's proactiv.com/majority. Proactiv, proactiv.com/majority to order and get clear skin for the win, as it was, ladies and gentlemen, or as it were. So, folks, I guess we don't take a break because we have in studio I'd like to introduce. Oh, and I should say that we're going to put all those links in our podcast description and in our YouTube's description. Joining me now on set, Aaron Kleinman. He is the Director of Research for Future Now. Aaron, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
Aaron, what is Future Now?
So Future Now and its associated PAC, Future Now Fund, we are the people that are trying to spread the gospel that the most powerful politicians that nobody talks about are state legislators. Basically, under the Constitution, we have devolved so much power to the states, and we really saw that power devolve, not really since the 70s for Democrats, but in particular during the Obama era. And so a lot of people woke up on election night, or after election night in 2016, and they saw Republicans didn't just have the presidency, they had control of everything else. And, hey, getting rid of Trump in 2020, that's really important that we have. It's something we have to do, but it's going to be a colossal effort, and it's going to be very tough for, just small groups of individuals to really impact that. But where small groups of individuals can have a massive impact, be it with, just time or money, is in state legislative races. And so we have focused on flipping chambers in a number of different states. So in 2019, we were able to flip the Virginia House.
All right. Well, let me. I want to dig in more in that, and just to pull your microphone a little bit closer to you.
Sure.
You can just. There you go. Exactly. And I should say that, and I've told this story probably half a dozen times over the past couple of years, and I finally put two and two together. Within days after the 2016 election, I don't know, maybe it was a month or 2 months, I can't remember.
We were all in kind of a fugue state.
It's true, and time dilation, according to Mike Cernovich. And a buddy of mine said, let's go to this meeting with this state senator from New York. And it was one of, I think I went to probably 4 meetings that were predominantly women, not even predominantly, like 95%. And some that were specifically women's groups that were having meetings about getting involved in politics. And each one I went to had a very similar theme, which was we can get the most value out of our buck in impacting state races, state legislatures across the country. And particularly, this is in the wake of, multiple places where Democrats would win the majority of votes in a state and then lose dramatically the majority of state legislature seats because of redistricting. We'll talk about that because a lot of the work you do is a sort of a North Star, I think, is the redistricting that's happening in 2010. But so the talk I went to was in the basement of like a yoga studio or something like that. And Daniel Squadron, who was a state senator, parts of Brooklyn, and I'm not sure where else, but
Lower Manhattan.
Lower Manhattan. And he gave an amazing presentation that seemed to be fairly ad hoc. And he was trying to organize this group to raise money and adopt essentially like some races in other states. And he made the case. There were 2 big themes that were raised there. One was this idea of like, you folks in this room could raise enough money to dramatically change the outcome of a state Senate race because the amount of dollars that people deal with are so limited. He talked also about ALEC, which was the American Legislative Exchange Council, which I think, this audience is probably somewhat familiar with. It is a group that has created model legislation that Republican lawmakers go and they grab it and they impose it in their states, which is why we saw all of this, even starting with Scott Walker back in the day in 2011, just sort of modeling this legislation. And he also talked about the IDW, or the IDC, I should say. He did not talk about the IDW. He talked about the IDC in New York State, and that subsequent in 2018, that all got demolished, which was that sort of like group of Democrats who were caucusing with Republicans and basically thwarting any progressive change in New York with, of course, Andrew Cuomo. And he went on to he ended up not running for re-election and starting this group. Is that right?
That's correct. He founded the group in 2017. We've been in operation for 2 years, and we've worked in 6 states in the 2017-2018 cycle, and we're growing that to 13 in 2019 and 2020.
Okay, so let's just do a little look back, and then we'll look forward. You guys went out and you isolated 6 states in which you felt that you could change the balance of power there?
Yeah. So when you're talking about state legislative races, the most important thing to look at isn't necessarily, a seat that you can flip, in isolation. It's you want to affect the balance of power in a state. Be that breaking a supermajority that overrides a governor's vetoes like we had in North Carolina, or winning a majority in a chamber like we attempted in Maine, New Hampshire, Arizona, and Michigan. In Maine and New Hampshire, we were able to flip the legislatures. Arizona and Michigan, we made gains, but we fell a little short, and we're hoping to finish the job in 2020, along with a bunch of other states where we're trying to either flip chambers, break supermajorities, or protect majorities.
The governor count, just in terms of governors, and because this implicates the importance of states, has the balance of power has, I don't know if it's fully shifted, but it's changed, hasn't it, over the past couple of years?
Oh, yes. During the, since Trump became president, I think of 2016, it was really election results from before 2016. You can't quite disregard them, but they are becoming less and less relevant because you've seen him really scramble the political alignments in America, where suburbs have really zoomed to the left and rural areas just keep bleeding Democratic support. And that moreover, Democrats are now turning out more in lower turnout elections. If you look during the Obama era, 2014 was maybe the worst year ever for Democrat elected officials. I mean, at least in this century, maybe since the 50s or something, Democrats just did not turn out in these lower turnout elections. Since Trump was elected, that has not been the case. And you're seeing Democrats turn out for these elections, and you're seeing that affect the balance of power in these states. And when you affect the balance of power in the state, that means you affect people's lives, because a state government in particular has a lot more interaction with the day-to-day life of a person. I mean, you think of yourself as like a New Yorker who took, the train to work today. The federal government might, have some grants for the MTA, but the day-to-day running of that is in Albany. Whether you're covered by Medicare, your health insurance, the rules governing health insurance in your state. Again, it's all from your state legislature. The federal government, has a massive impact on big, diffuse things, but your state government has so much more of a day-to-day impact on your life. And Democrats really, for decades, had been ignoring that. And so we're hoping, to really reverse the tide. And as Daniel had said, the people in that room, they ended up having an impact. I'm sure that the people in that room ended up flipping, Maine or New Hampshire or Virginia. And if Democrats can kind of think strategically like this and realize in these federal races, Democrats will have enough money for those generally. I mean, we've seen that. We saw that in 2018. Money wasn't the problem. And there were some state races where Democrats, especially in state legislatures, where Democrats really could have used more money. And so we want people to focus on those races more and really realize you can make so much more of an impact, not just in the election, but actually, in people's lives by focusing on state legislatures.
And this also implicates gerrymandering and redistricting that's going to be huge in 2020.
Absolutely. Voting is the right from which all other rights spring. And if you can't vote for a legislature that reflects the will of the people, then the majority of the people is thwarted. So 2020 is going to be the big election for governing who's going to be in charge of maps in a lot of states. And so, for example, North Carolina, we're going back to the North Carolina House there, because in North Carolina, the governor does not have a veto. It's all comes down to the legislature there. And so North Carolina has had, scads of litigation about just how gerrymandered they are. And if you've been following the news, there was that
racially gerrymandered.
This is, it's basically Jim Crow stuff down there. And I've been following the news. I mean, just the lengths that which Republicans went to thwart the will of the majority there are, it's almost mind-boggling. We're still trying to catch up to, how badly they gerrymandered the state. Wisconsin is another state where, again, Democrats keep winning a majority of state legislative votes, but it's so horribly gerrymandered that they barely get above 40% of the seats in the legislature.
Right. It's they won 53% in the last election.
I think it was 52 or 53, and
Republicans had 64% of the seats.
Democrats flipped to one seat, so they're down to 63 in the House. Yeah,
right, fair enough. That's just bizarre. I feel like that, if the American public could sort of really absorb the implications of that. I mean, to a certain extent, we see that on a national level, right? I mean, we saw
exactly.
But at least there's an electoral college that's not supposed to be set up that way in the state level.
Yes.
Okay, so let's look at 2019, because want to see what happened in 2019. There's largely the news was good. There are some caveats, and I want to talk more about this rural-urban divide, because, the big question is like, are the Republican policies in terms of rural America that much better for rural America than the Democrats' policies, or is there something else going on?
No, they aren't. It's really what's happening is there's an increasing fusion of your political and cultural identity, and the Republican, political and cultural identity is focused more on rural areas where, it's not just, living far apart from someone doesn't necessarily make you a conservative. It's the demographics of rural areas that really kind of help turbocharge that. They're less diverse than suburbs and cities. They're a lot older than suburbs and cities. The kind of separate nature of the people and kind of the idea that you have to be more self-sufficient, less of a communitarian, ethic there, I guess. I think that does play a smaller role, but they're wider, more church-going, older, and so because those are demographics shifting toward Republicans, Democrats keep losing ground in rural areas. Now, that's not to say Democrats can't stem that tide. One really interesting thing we saw in 2018 was actually, while rural areas are older than average, there are still plenty of young voters in there, and the young voters in rural areas actually were a bright spot in 2018. They really bounced back toward Democrats. And, Democrats don't have to win rural areas to win the presidency. They just need to do as well as John Kerry did in rural areas to win the presidency, and then just hope that.
Okay, so one thing that I think people need to understand, and I still, sometimes I have trouble wrapping my head around this, is that there is, we keep hearing stories of Donald Trump finding more votes out there. Mm-hmm. And these are not people who were like, I used to be a Democrat, but now I'm voting for Trump. Or is it just there are more people, there's just I'm the type of person who would vote for Trump, I just don't vote. And then I decide I'm going to vote. Or which one is that?
It's a mixture of those. I think you have a lot of people in rural areas that, if you look at the 2016 election results, I mean, I know, like we said earlier, we were kind of in a fugue state after that. I mean, I remember when election night was starting and looking at those first rural counties coming in, and I thought, wow, there's no way Trump can keep this up everywhere. But he was winning by 70%, and instead of 60, he's winning 70% in rural areas like Pennsylvania and Michigan, where Obama or where Mitt Romney only got 60%. And it was a mixture of Democratic turnout in those areas collapsed. Like the Clinton campaign, there were issues just turning out voters outside major metros, and the turnout in those areas just totally collapsed. But I think there is this element of the Trump campaign. He spoke to people who might see themselves as outside the political process. There are a lot of non-voters that it turns out he was able to turn out in these races. I think if you're living in a rural area and a non-voter, think about the news sources you have, AM radio,
right.
Your local newspaper has been hollowed out, and you get your news from a Facebook group. I mean, think you tend to be older and whiter and church going. how do
People don't know, too, I should say, that when you compare the clearance numbers of an MSNBC, now I think, particularly over the past 3 or 4 years, they've been increasingly populated by Republicans. I mean, MSNBC, that's a publicly, people know that. I think there's been stories to that effect. Andy Lack wants to take the network more, sort of old style Republican, as it were, whatever. But the point being, just as a counterpoint to Fox has clearance, in other words, carriage on cable networks throughout the middle of the country. And CNN, to a certain extent, MSNBC almost exclusively on the coasts, I should say, more or less. And, which gives you a sense of obviously who their market is. And you see this also, even the broadcast networks have different emphasis on who they feel they're appealing to. ABC, much more heartland than, let's say, NBC. But all these places, the news sources are Fox, Rush Limbaugh, or someone worse or similar, and a crappy local newspaper that's probably owned by similarly situated people.
Also, keep in mind that local news, like local television news, that's one of the biggest conservative media sources that nobody talks about. Even if it's not necessarily like a Sinclair station, local news. I don't know if you've watched it. I don't really watch it in New York City, but I see, promos during football. It's always like, shooting here, crime here. What are what's going to kill your kid today? It's very fear-based, very regressive news. And, if you're a Democrat trying to reach those people, they've been living in a different information, network from a lot of
so younger people, though, who are turning out, it's because they're basically spending their time on different media, or is it they just they're exposed to more things?
I think if you're a younger person in a rural area, you're probably a little more educated than maybe people older than you. Maybe a little less likely to attend church. You probably have a different information network, or at the very least, you've been exposed to different information networks. If you're like a 60-year-old living in a rural area, when's the last time that you had any access to, if you're on Twitter, you're not following anyone remotely liberal. I'm sure just if you're younger, you probably just have a different information diet, basically. It's young, and it's a generational divide as well, where just younger people tend to be more liberal, and that doesn't matter. You're more liberal than I'm more liberal than older people in New York, and then someone living in Mankato, Minnesota, is more liberal than an older person in Mankato, Minnesota.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about 2019 a little bit, because there were special elections. Let's work backwards, shall we?
Sure.
So let's start with Louisiana. What are we to make of Louisiana? Was that just a foregone conclusion that John Bel Edwards would win? Is that indicative of Donald Trump not having sort of the coattails, or is that just he has coattails? They're just bigger negative coattails than his positive ones.
Well, so Louisiana, John Bel Edwards, as you mentioned at the top of the show, he put 500,000 people on Medicaid. He focused on increasing teacher pay. He inherited Bobby Jindal's horrible budget, and he fixed it. So he was always a popular guy, but he still is in a Republican state. And so going into the runoff against Eddie Rispone, the Republican he was running against, the question was, can a Democrat still win with all these Republican headwinds against him? And he did. He, as you also hinted to, he's pro-gun, he's pro-life. And so that kind of helped neutralize some of the attacks on him. But he still bled a lot of support in rural areas, and he was able to increase it. He had great African-American support, I think, and the anecdotal stories coming out of Louisiana are that, the Trump visits actually really helped goose African-American support for Edwards.
Really?
Yeah. But the main takeaway that I think is really applicable globally is, if there were some type of, Republican anti-impeachment resentment that was really energizing their voters, they would have swamped Democrats in Louisiana. But I will also say that, turnout was way up. It was higher than it was in the primary. It was higher
turnout for both Republicans and Democrats.
So, it could be that impeachment is energizing both sides about as much. In a 2019 Louisiana Saturday runoff, it's hard to, project that out to 2020. It's just a different type of election. But you're seeing that Republicans and Democrats are both being animated really by, and we've seen this, nationwide, people are animated by how they feel about Trump. He dominates everything in the political space. How does impeachment play into that? Well, it seems like it just plays into these kind of pre-existing narratives about Trump so far, where Democrats and Republicans are both seem to be motivated by what's going on in the news.
I don't want to get ahead of myself, but it's the implications of impeachment are going to be different in these type of races when you're talking about a senator or a congressperson, right? Because they're going to actually have to make an affirmative, explicit statement, essentially, a vote on what they think about Donald Trump. And if the Democrats do it right, it's going to be you and Donald Trump sitting in a tree, KYSSING, if you vote to not impeach him, right?
Well, I mean, I think it's you and Donald Trump sitting in a tree, CORRUPT. Yeah, corrupt. I mean, corruption has to be the message.
Corrupting?
Corrupting.
What is the verb for that? What would you do? Corrupting. I think CURRUPTING would be the way to do it.
I think the syllables work a little better without the...
All right, well, whatever.
Yeah. No,
I think people get the point.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, Democrats in 2020 is going to be a referendum on Trump no matter what. Any presidential election campaign is going to be a referendum on them. And I think, nationally, Democrats need to make it, any federal office holder, if you stand with Trump, you're for corruption, basically. And if a Republican dares vote against Trump, I mean, they risk the wrath of their base.
Right.
And so, an impeachment, was always going to be that play where ultimately you're just forcing Republicans to take a stand. Because even in 2018, you had Republicans nationwide being like, well, I don't agree with everything he tweets, and he's been good for the economy. So, and you can still vote for me. I'm one of the normal ones. But if you are on record voting for this guy,
it makes it much harder.
It makes it much harder.
All right, well, we'll circle back to that because I want to keep going back in time.
All right.
Kentucky. Matt Bevin loses. Andy Beshear wins. How much should we read into that?
I really am hesitant to read too much into that in terms of implications for 2019, other than, again, if Trump really were energizing Republicans nationwide, he would have been able to get Matt Bevin over the hump there. But, again, Matt Bevin, I mean,
that's a relevant story, it seems to me, that because everybody would have assumed that his ability to activate these other voters would overwhelm, and it's not. And when we're looking, it's hard because we don't have an apples to apples type of comparison.
It isn't, and I mean, that's any projection out to 2020 is, it's a bit of, you're putting together little bits of evidence here and there to see what it all adds up to. And so no one, you can't over-determine any one election result, be it the Kentucky governor's race or the Mississippi governor's race, for example, or, state legislative races in New Jersey or Virginia. That on their own, those don't tell you much, but when you take everything we've learned to date together, it tells a story. And I think the story we've seen from 2019, and that includes Kentucky, is that there is no kind of counter-revolutionary force out there that's ready to kind of flood the polls to vote Republican. But that said, it's not as if Andy Beshear rode a blue wave, so to speak, into office. He really ran on, I don't think people really appreciate just how unpopular, and with good reason, Matt Bevin was. He, really alienated a lot of people on purpose. He went after the school, he went after teachers directly a lot in the state. And, the thing about going after teachers, specifically like targeting them is, there are teachers everywhere, and parents tend to like their kids' teachers, and parents tend to vote. And so, again, when you're talking about, just keeping down Republican margins in rural areas, one way to do that is to have your teachers pissed at a Republican. And, listen, they're not going to win over all the parents, but they'll win over some parents. And that's the difference between winning and losing.
I talked to my comrades in Kentucky, too, who said a big issue was the bridge tax.
Yes.
There was a bridge going to the suburbs of northern Kentucky where there are a lot of people who might have voted Republican, but they were pissed at Bevin because they didn't want to pay the tax.
Yeah, you remember the Covington Catholic kid?
Yes.
Yeah, that county, MAGA territory, but it's a suburb. where it's a little more educated, and Democrats really, I mean, Bashir won because he totally cut into Trump's margins in that area. This very conservative area, it's a suburban area, a little more upscale, a little more culturally upscale. And then Bevin was alienating all these people who have to get into Cincinnati every day, with this bridge tax issue. And Bashir was able to ride that to victory. So, Bevin was just such a uniquely unpopular guy that Bashir was able to beat him in Kentucky. That said,
and Trump could not overcome that.
That. And I mean, if you want to take, I guess, a more global lesson from there is, Trump is also a guy who likes to alienate specific groups. And whoever the Democratic nominee is, I mean, I think you need to focus on activating some of those groups that he is really alienating in particular. And if you want to talk about rural America, run on those tariffs that that have just been ravaging them. And his agriculture secretary telling dairy farmers that hey, there needs to be fewer of you guys. We want more consolidation.
We need to call dairy farmers.
I think and. I have seen some of I think there have been some big Democratic groups that have really been working on that messaging a year out. So I hope to see more of that.
And so, all right, so let's go backwards. And then we have the Virginia and Pennsylvania were two states where, I mean, Virginia, let's talk about both those states because they were good, not quite as good as maybe one would hope.
Yeah. So in Virginia, let's start with Virginia, where the Democrats flipped both chambers of the state legislature. They have they have a governing trifecta in the state for the first time in I think 30 years, and like a progressive, and 30 years ago the Virginia Democrats in charge were not exactly progressive.
Right.
So this is a progressive majority in Virginia for the first time in a long time, and so there are a lot of kind of policy imperatives that they can take on now around expanding affordable health care and investing in kids and good jobs and clean water and resilient infrastructure, all those great things. And so the material impact of this is great. They flipped both chambers. But we saw some Republicans, especially kind of the savvier Republican politicians in Virginia, were able to distance themselves from Trump. And if you looked at the races they ran, they were running on like the same issues that Democrats normally run. It's like, oh, I'm going to protect schools. Oh, I'm going to protect us from rising waters. Because like Norfolk, Virginia, for example, has some of the worst climate change flooding of anywhere in the United States. And you saw Republicans running on sea barriers and and renewables. And Trump's name didn't come up, and so you saw they gave Republicans a blueprint for winning in tough races in Virginia, and it is run the hell away from Trump in suburban areas. Now in 2020, especially again, if you force Republicans to vote on impeachment,
exactly,
you can't really do that.
Right. Exactly. I mean, that I think is, I mean, they seem to me to be running as the old school Republicans who are like, we all agree on the problems. We just happen to think that business can take care of the solution more, right? Which is basically what we're just going to pretend like we care about these, the same problems, and we have just different solutions. Which we now refer to those people as like, what is it? Isn't there like a solutions caucus now or something?
The problem
solver caucus, like third way, type of. And so let's move to Pennsylvania because, you said you saw those rural districts in Pennsylvania coming back with sort of astonishing numbers in 2016. In terms of like the how he was running up the score in those deficits. And we have one of our regular listeners who now has a show on Twitch. I can't remember what Mike's from PA's. What is it called? I can't remember. He's going to kill me. But he called in the day after and he said he's what is it? Central Committee on Twitch. Folks, check it out. He called in the day after the election and said, he was works in Democratic politics. He said we were doing get out the vote. The Clinton campaign, because they weren't doing a big field program beforehand, they were just using algorithms. On the day before the election, we could get out the vote effort. 25% of the houses that they're knocking on were Trump voters. because their numbers were all their lists were all screwed up because they were knocking on doors that the algorithm said should have been Clinton voters. And it just turns out that like 1/4 of the people you're telling to go to the polls are your opponent's voters. So what works in those situations? Is it really just a matter of a Democratic candidate needs to find certain pockets in those areas, certain like demographic pockets where they can say push on one issue just to mitigate their loss there and then run it up in the cities? Is that basically the plan?
I think it's a more holistic approach. I think, first of all, don't use an algorithm to say that you don't have to do field. I think that will be a good first step.
Right. That's exactly what that's the lesson I learned from my run against Schumer, if that happens, but we can talk about that later.
So if you're going out to these rural communities, I think, again, it's like you want to frame progressive issues in a way that, speaks to you want to meet people where they are. And so, for example, talking about healthcare, for example, I think it's great that, wide swaths of our base thinks that healthcare is a human right, and that really activates our base. But when you go out to these places, healthcare is a human right. It's not a compelling message. It's really, what you want to say is, it's like we want everyone to have affordable healthcare. We want life expectancy to improve. We want you to not get surprise bills anymore. You want to, I think you want to campaign on the idea that these issues that you're running on will have a material impact on people's lives. And so that's, I think, how you message in those areas. And I think it's also just don't write off those areas just because they're, again, it seems like there was a lot of, for their field programs are writing off rural areas. Again, you don't need to win rural areas.
Right.
You just need to lose them by the same amount that Kerry lost them by.
Right.
And then you win.
Right. And so that's the problem, is if you abandon these things, you're not in any way mitigating the loss, and you need to mitigate the loss a little bit.
Yeah. It's, in Pennsylvania, you don't get like a special prize for running up the score a lot in the, Philadelphia suburbs. You got to win votes wherever you can. A vote in rural Cambria County counts just as much as a vote in Philadelphia there.
I can't remember if it was not Ed Rollins. His name escapes me. The former Ed Rendell.
Yeah.
Or if it was Chuck Schumer, who said, for every blue collar worker we lose in Pittsburgh, we're going to pick up 3 in the Philadelphia suburbs, or something to that effect.
Well, they got that right, just the numbers backwards.
So, okay. All right. That was what I was curious as to, like, what exactly, which end of that did they get wrong? And they got both ends wrong.
Well, they understood that there was a trade-off between rural voters and suburban ones, and they just didn't appreciate that the trade-off might work in the other direction.
Well, that's good. At least they understood that there's a dynamic that goes on. People are going to vote. I got that part right. So, all right. And so one of the things that Virginia, just to sum up, Virginia and Pennsylvania tell us is that there's not going to be, they're driving out, as much as Democrats are pushing the boundaries of get out the vote that we've seen, at least in decades in many respects.
Yeah.
They are too.
Yeah. So going into 2020, one thing that we're pretty sure of is that there's going to be record turnout. There are going to be a lot of people who've never voted before voting for the first time. And what we're trying to figure out is what those people look like. Now, I think there's kind of this tendency in liberal circles to see those people, they're going to vote Democratic no matter what. But how many of those people are like that, those people we were talking about earlier, people in a rural area who've had a conservative information diet, who might not, really see politics as very relevant to them. All of a sudden, Trump's kind of there screwing everything up in Washington, D.C., fighting those pointy-headed elites. There could be plenty of those. And, in the Pennsylvania, they had kind of their county elections, and we saw that in those more conservative areas that still, kind of had traditionally Democratic governments, and then similarly, these blue, these suburbs that are turning blue in the Philadelphia suburbs that have traditionally been run by Republicans, you're seeing that, there are motivated voters on both sides willing to turn out kind of the historically dominant parties, if those historically dominant parties aren't willing to really kind of adapt to these new electorates.
So when you look across the states, and maybe, I don't know, maybe this is proprietary information you don't want to tell because you don't want the Republicans to know this, but what I imagine they have, they can do the same analysis on some level.
Yeah.
What states are the ones that are not necessarily the low-hanging fruit, but the lowest hanging fruit for Democrats to flip in terms of like state legislatures or, get control of the states or whatever the metric you use there is?
Yeah. So heading into 2020, Pennsylvania and Michigan are two states that we're really interested in, and there are Democrats in both states are just a few seats shy of. In Pennsylvania, House and Senate are both up, and so we could get majorities in both. Michigan, the Senate isn't up in presidential years, but we could flip the House. In Kansas, actually, people don't think of Kansas as a particularly fruitful area, but Kansas has a lot of well-educated voters who traditionally vote Republican. They also have a Democratic governor who faces bare supermajorities in both chambers. And so a small investment in the Kansas legislature will make it so that Republicans can't override her vetoes. In Iowa, we're just 3 seats shy of a majority in the House, and you have a lot of areas in Iowa, in the Iowa House that went from Obama to Trump, and it's winning those voters back. And how do you do that? Those are some of the states that we're really most interested in, probably some of the lowest hanging fruit. And then also, we barely, it was close in 2018 when we won majorities in Maine and New Hampshire. And, Maine, they've passed really a lot of progressive legislation there around, prescription drug prices and red flag laws and renewables. And so, but Republicans are going to be gunning for flipping back the state Senate there, and we want to make sure that we can keep it. In New Hampshire, if a few hundred votes flip in the state Senate there, Democrats don't take that chamber, and then they could also, and they still have a Republican governor there, but you could actually, the Republican governorship is up every 2 years in New Hampshire, and so you could actually get a trifecta in New Hampshire. So that's just some of the lower hanging fruit there. Also, North Carolina, now that they have new maps. We're working with the North Carolina House, which did not vote for, the Republican. We're not working with the Senate. We don't really know what they did with the maps there. But
right.
But in North Carolina, especially if you care about redistricting, the governor does not have a say in redistricting in North Carolina. So if you really want to flip the North Carolina House, they're just 5 seats shy, and they got a new map that made a lot more Republicans endangered. And so that's another exciting opportunity as well. Okay,
I got 2 more questions. One, give me you said in Iowa there's a lot of Obama to Trump voters.
Yes.
Like, what do you have a sense of, like, what was that dynamic there?
I have the sense that antipathy to Clinton, I think, was a big deal there.
Uniquely, antipathy uniquely towards Clinton.
I think some of that carried through to other Democrats. I mean, Iowa really. I'm sure, because I look at the district level at all these things, and I'm shocked at just, how big the spreads are between some races. There are people who really split tickets in Iowa, and I'm fascinated by the state, and I really am trying to learn more about, what this dynamic is. I think, we've seen stories where people there kind of, I think they were just kind of wanted something new a little bit in 2016, and Clinton didn't represent that. And I think Obama to Trump voters nationwide, they've done a lot of stories on those vote switching. I think, anti-immigration views were a big driver of that. I'd be interested to see if that really carries to Iowa as well. I think I think the anti-immigration thing really was more in, like New York, for example, when we saw like Staten Island, very red, and I think that was a big part of that there, and like Suffolk County. I'm not quite sure how much that, I'd be fascinated to really dig deeper into the Iowa-specific Obama-Trump voters. But, you were able to see in 2018, Democrats win back a lot of those. And I think a lot of it's just people wanting something new, but also there is the dynamic where you have the rural-urban divergence. And in Iowa, a lot of the ground we gained back in 2018 was in Des Moines, was in Dubuque, was in Cedar Rapids. They're these smaller cities, but they're cities nonetheless more educated than average.
So didn't recapture those Obama to Trump voters, but overcame them by driving up numbers in areas that were more sympathetic to Democrats.
Well, so you want to talk about proprietary? We actually we've come up with a measure. We call it the Comey coefficient. We're still working out some, but we try to use the demographics of a state legislative seat to predict how much Democrats will over or underperform the Clinton baseline. And the three things it really takes into account are the white population, because she did poorly among white voters relative to other Democrats. The poverty rate, actually, because areas with higher poverty, she tended to do poorly relative to other Democrats. And then people who have some college education, and if you look at Iowa and like the Comey coefficients there, you see a lot of areas that she lost in like the eastern part of the state along the Mississippi River, where Democrats had been able to hang on to their seats with somewhat ease. And it's just, for whatever reason, those, kind of people, there are a lot of people there who just didn't like Clinton, but will still vote for Democrats. And there are a lot of those in kind of the eastern part of Iowa. And so hopefully, a lot of them kind of went back in 2018, and we're hoping that, in 2020, we can carry that forward. In addition to flipping, again, kind of erstwhile Republican voters in like the Des Moines suburbs and Cedar Rapids, Dubuque, et cetera.
Comey as in Jim Comey? Okay, you're having fun with it. Okay,
we're having fun with the name of it.
You guys, you math nerds, you got to come up with stuff like that. I guess
you get the alliteration with Comey coefficient too.
No, I got it. I get it. All right. So, lastly, right before the show, we were talking about Maine, and we, the story of impeachment in my mind has always been about that dynamic, particularly in the Senate, although, to some extent in the House as well, although I don't think there's going to be as many opportunities for it. A lot of the House has sorted itself out. There's not a lot of people running for the Republicans who are holding on to their seat, who are like, I'm a Republican, but I keep some distance from Trump. That doesn't happen in the House anymore. Those people have more or less, that animal is gone.
One thing to keep in mind when talking about the U.S. House is just, it really is like a bad job. Like, you have to live in two places, and you have to spend like every waking minute raising money. And so if you're a Republican who really just kind of got into this to crush the poor, but don't really like want to engage in these kind of Trumpian culture wars, you tap
You
out.
already retired.
Yeah,
right. You already retired.
Why bother? Become a lobbyist.
Right.
It'll be so much easier.
And there, I mean, I don't know. You would know this probably better than I would, but there can't be more than, if there are any, I think there's some, but not many seats where like Hillary Clinton won the district and the Republican won the Republican Congressperson won.
Oh no, exactly. There are three left.
Three.
There are three
in the entire country.
And one of them's retiring.
Okay, so so that's not in play. But there's a half a dozen of those, it seems to me, in the Senate, right? People who want to sort of be Republican, but want to keep Donald Trump at arm's length to some degree.
Well, in the Senate, you have to keep in mind that up in 2020, there are only 2 Republicans in seats in states that voted for Clinton. There are other Republicans in states that could vote for the 2020 nominee, like Arizona. There are 2 in Georgia now, Iowa, North Carolina. Those are all going to be targets to varying degrees.
Colorado, obviously.
Yeah, Colorado and Maine are the 2.
Right, okay.
And then, of course, you have to keep in mind that we have to defend Doug Jones in Alabama.
Right. Okay, so with that said, the idea is that Democrats want to not just make this a referendum on Trump, but to marry those senators in those states to Donald Trump.
Yeah, because what we saw in 2018, and really since Trump was elected, Republicans in more marginal seats, it's I don't agree with everything he tweets, and
right.
I don't think all this stuff, but he's good for the economy, and so I'm going to keep supporting him on some things. And then if you're, this won't be as much of the case in state and local, and Republicans can still run away from him a bit in these state legislative races, though with they're going to have to go with whatever the national tide is and try to figure out. But in these federal races, these Republicans, they're going to have to take a stand on do you support, and Democratic messaging needs to be on do you support corruption? you see these Republican attempts at obfuscation, at marginalia, at trying to make all these weird process points. And I think Democrats just need to kind of keep pounding the if you vote to either not impeach him or if you vote to not convict him, you are supporting corruption.
So Susan Collins, you basically said she has two choices, obviously, on how she's going to vote there. Yeah. But in terms of what one choice or the other would signal, and it never occurred to me that she could try and get away with this. But you know Maine. You guys worked in Maine this last cycle. You suggested that the other thing she could do is go full on LePage. I mean, not full on LePage, but because I don't even think LePage can go full on LePage.
Right. I think what I want to disabuse people of is the idea that Maine is a blue state. It voted for Clinton by I think about 3 points. It splits its electoral votes, and its more rural congressional seat voted for Trump by more than 10 points. I think Collins would be fine. Just or for her personally, I think she would be okay. Saying, "Hey, I support Donald Trump in these things. I think that impeachment's a witch hunt, sham, whatever." And she'll, basically try to really crank up Republican turnout and hope. And keep in mind in Maine, you have a lot of rural blue collar Democrats there that she can try to flip.
The idea being that she goes, if I'm in for a penny, I'm in for a pound. If I'm going to vote for him, I might as well milk as much out of that vote as I can and not worry about trying to cut, and basically cut my losses and milk as much as I can out of that vote, as opposed to trying to sort of thread the needle.
Yeah.
And she's got to make that decision fairly early, it seems to me. After she makes that vote, she's got to basically then become basically do what we just saw. What was her face in the intelligence hearings?
Yeah.
What was Stefanik or what?
Yeah, Stefanik.
Yeah.
And by the way, I mean, her district in the basically Adirondacks and north of New York, not that dissimilar from Maine. That district, or especially the rural portions of Maine. I mean, that district, like that one in rural Maine, is voted for Obama twice and then went to Trump. And you have that rural urban divergence, and there's still Portland is a growing area. It's a very liberal area, but there's a lot of rural area in Maine too. And if Susan Collins, she could be like, listen, I know that I can get something like 47% of the vote, no matter what, is going to vote for me. And then I just try to get that other 3-4% at the margins. That's a strategic choice that she can make. Maine's a purple state. It's not a blue state. And so she's not just an automatic out. And, we have to keep the state, and again, that further down the ballot, the state Senate there, we flipped that and we've been able to pass all this great progressive legislation. But Susan Collins and Donald Trump are going to try to, create kind of a red wave in Maine that might undo all that. And so Maine is going to be a critical 2020 state.
I wonder if Dianne Feinstein, wasn't it Dianne Feinstein came out and said she didn't want to see Susan Collins go from the Senate? Was it, she said that? I wonder if she will go and, she will join Susan Collins if she moves in that direction. Yeah, it was Dianne Feinstein. That'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But Aaron Kleinman, the group is Future Now Fund. If people want to get involved in that in some fashion, how would they go about doing that?
So futurenow.org.
Go get a math degree.
No.
All right.
You don't need a math degree. You just need to trust people. You have to trust that we know what we're doing.
Trust mathematicians.
I'm actually not a mathematician. I'm a lawyer, but I'm conversant in math.
Okay, fair enough.
So go to futurenow.org. You can follow us on Twitter at FutureNowUSA. And we're really, we're trying to flip states, not just, to rack up wins. We're trying to create, progressive governing majorities that are going to improve the lives of the people living in them. And, if all the listeners here are willing to join us, we can make a huge difference in those states.
I feel like I would be doing a disservice if I didn't say how easily could someone like Tom Steyer come in and say, instead of spending $55 million to get in one debate, 4 lines in a debate or something like that, I'm going to commit myself to winning a bunch of state races.
So Tom Steyer, the amount of money that he had, when you're spending in a state at some point the money you spend, there's just no marginal value to it. It's like, what's another mailer or radio ad really going to do? So, there's a spending limit in each state of like what, money, how much money can really make a difference. And at some point, you can't ultimately buy an election. But Tom Steyer could basically fully fund efforts to flip basically every chamber within reach if he wanted.
Honestly.
Tom, if you're listening, again, it's Future Now USA, futurenow.org. Drop us a line. We'd be happy to talk to you about this.
Wait, is there a better argument for why people shouldn't have that much money than just how irresponsible this guy is with it in the guise of trying to help?
It's a huge waste.
Oh my God.
I actually think Tom Steyer is a brilliant man, and he should absolutely talk to Future Now about the work that we're doing in the States.
I mean, it's quite possible he's listening today. I wouldn't bet on it, but Aaron, always a real pleasure. Thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me on, Sam.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to head into that segment of the program that we call the Fun Half, which is available for members. And you can join us by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only support the free show, you not only get it commercial free, but you also get this extra content every single day. So check that out. Also, again, AM Quickie. I should add, if you're someone who can't afford the free show, and people go through very difficult times, but you want the extra content, send us an email at majorityreporters@gmail.com. We will not lock anybody out for lack of funds. And if you want to help the show, but you don't want to spend any money, subscribe to AM Quickie. Let's get this baby up the charts. Could start to, as they say in the business, monetize it, and give us a review on iTunes. There's a lot of different things you can do. And I should tell you, is it back? When is it happening with Just Coffee? 30% off, I think, is starting just in days. So check out justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. See if, I don't know if they've quite started it yet, but 30% off. This is the time to go and try Just Coffee. You can go, you find out which blend you like, you realize you like the Majority Report blend, and then you found your coffee, maybe for the rest of your life. Reminder, this program today was sponsored by, in part by Proactiv. They got their next generation acne treatment system. It's called Proactiv MD. It contains an innovative dermatologist recommended topical retinoid called adapalene. And I know this not just because they Proactiv let me know this. I know this because of my former wife's father, who was a dermatologist, who was, would prescribe this for my daughter and my ex-wife. But right now, I don't know why I would bring that into an ad, frankly.
It doesn't get more credible than that.
Exactly. Right now, our listeners can go to proactiv.com/majority, receive an exclusive on-the-go bag, which has Proactiv's T-Zone oil absorber. So your T-Zone oil gets absorbed. Body acne wipes and Green Tea Moisturizer. That's close to $100 value. And there's a 60-day money-back guarantee. Again, that's proactiv.com, proactiv.com/majority to order and to get clear skin for the win. Jamie, what's next on the Antifada?
I'm so glad you asked. So this week on the Antifada, I spoke with Tom, Terrence, and Tanya of the Trillbilly Workers Party, one of my favorite podcasts. Very exciting. We talked a little bit about the elections in Kentucky. We talked about how they all became dyed-in-the-wool radicals as well as electoral skeptics. We talked about the pitfalls of the Just Transition program, which they have seen tried and failed over and over again in their state. And we also did a little over-under on the success of a protracted People's War in the mountains of Appalachia. So check it out, folks.
Matt.
On Literary Hangover on the podcast feed and on YouTube, we did Orinoco, or The Royal Slave by Afra Ben. Afra Ben is the first English woman to earn her living by the pen. She was also a Tory monarchist spy, and not a very well-paid spy, which is why she had to do the writing. But yeah, check all that stuff out, folks.
Imagine being a spy and not getting paid well for it. What a drag. All right, folks. See you in the fun half. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous. You're a little bit upset. You're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude. You want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238. 56, 27, 1/2, 5 eighths, 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey Sam, hey Andy, you guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
yes, ladies and gentlemen, Sam will be with you shortly. I'm going to try and set up the. What the heck? There it is. Still got to get how to put the numbers of all the, just because it's a huge mishmash of stuff. It's very difficult. Very difficult. Let's just start with this story. So apparently over the weekend, Donald Trump, who last went in for a scheduled physical 9 months ago, was announced beforehand. He went in. Turned out he was in great health. The guy is like a triathlete in many respects.
McDonald's does pickle your insides, much like heroin.
There is a theory out there that the less exercise you do, the less wear and tear on the body. And
you don't want to use up your life force.
You don't want to use up the life force. And so, now Donald Trump is one of those guys who, as you know, is very health conscious. And he realized I have some extra time on his hand. He's so busy normally that he actually apparently thought I'm not due for my annual physical for 3 months, but he woke up, I guess it was Saturday morning, and he decided, I'm going to go in to Walter Reed just to get my unplanned, unscheduled, unannounced annual physical. I'm going to go in. It wasn't for anything else. Besides that, here is footage of him going in, I guess, in for this thing. Go ahead, run it. Let's see this. There he is. He's just... oh, there he is. Looks great. Running in. Everything's fine. No problem here. Had a great physical. As you can see, came out of physical. Classic pose when you come out of physical. Rush into the car. Who knows what it could have been, right? Indigestion.
Serious indigestion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look. I once went back years ago. I was in a cab with my ex-wife. We were headed to a, like an open house for middle school for Mila. And I started getting like a pain right here. And my ex-wife was talking to her mom, who's a nurse. And I was just like this. And she's like, what's going on? I said, I got a pain right here. She just tells it to her mother, and her mother is a nurse. She says, you got to go right to the hospital. And I was like, I'm not going to the hospital. I'm not going to pay for that. Instead, we went to one of those urgent care places, and that only cost $250. And they said, you should go to the hospital because they don't want any liability. So then I went to the emergency room and just sat there. The pain had already gone away. Well, that was the thing that set the doctor off. I said, I just had it for like 15, 20 minutes. That's not indicative of a heart attack? He's like, well, that's actually, yeah, that's exactly what it is indicative of. Like, that's the way that it works. And I'm like, what? And so I go to the emergency room. I waited until like 4 a.m. I literally waited 7 hours there, and it cost me $2,000. That was really fun.
Damn.
Yep. And on top of that, they sent it to a collection agency because I didn't even get the bill. Not only did the emergency room send me a bill, which I paid, there was some copay with my massive copay with the health insurance. And then like I get a collection agency for $500 from the emergency room doctor. And I'm like, wait a second, I paid the emergency room, but there apparently was another bill. This system works so well. So well.
Choice. Let's have a choice.
It was nice to have that choice. But I don't know what's going on with Donald Trump, but it's probably just indigestion. But if even a bit of that is a function of impeachment, good argument that we should have started impeachment months and months ago.
Anything to spike his cortisol, as they say.
Exactly.
Super calm, because this is what I wanted the Democrats to do.
Boy, did I own the libs by making you guys think that I had to go to the hospital.
Thank you for impeaching me. I feel so great now.
Feels good. You know what it did? It made me count my blessings and think about my health. And so I went and got a physical. So
they can't just do a physical at the golf course?
Sorry, libs. You failed. Let's play this clip of Bill Barr. Back when, and do we have a clip of that other one? Back when Donald Trump went on his little jag about send them home, talking about the members of the squad should go back from where they came from. Bill Barr came out like a couple of days later and gave a speech that was the Bill Barr version of that speech. And I mean, I think prior to that, I was well aware of his history, and which was not a positive one in my estimation. It was one where he was largely responsible for protecting people involved in Iran-Contra, and his work in the Justice Department I think it was the OLC at the time. And I always saw Bill Barr as a smarter Jeff Sessions, but one who had this ideology of the unitary executive, and that's what this was about. But when you hear the speeches that he's giving like this, you begin to realize that he is like a movement conservative who is also, it turns out, to be a bit of a religious zealot. And that this is very much about something far more insidious and complicated. Here is just a little bit of a clip of him coming out after the send them home stuff where he reiterates what Trump is saying, but just does it in a Bill Barrian way.
My concern today is that under the banner of identity politics, some political factions are seeking to obtain power by dividing Americans, and they undermine the values that draw us together, such as a shared commitment to our country's success. This is the breeding ground for hatred, and we must reject it.
All right, so there he is. He is speaking at the podium of the Department of Justice, which knows he's got to just go down the hall to get all the statistics on right-wing violence. But he says that there's a group of people who are running on identity politics. This is right on the heels of the squad thing. And they hate America's success. They hate America, and that's what's creating violence. That is, this is Donald Trump, just with an actual education and a addled brain. And here he is over the weekend, I guess it was on Friday, now basically attacking the Constitution and the fact that Democrats should be, and that members of the House should be exercising any oversight. This guy should be impeached, because when people talk about these scenarios of Donald Trump losing the election and not leaving, this is the guy who's going to be arguing that we need to go to the Supreme Court. I mean, this is the guy who's going to be the problem. It's going to be Bill Barr. And I'm not convinced, frankly, that what they were doing in Ukraine was about 2016 as much as it was about 2020. And I don't mean just so they had dirt on their candidate. Well, I think they wanted to create a narrative that was their backup plan for saying this election was completely hopelessly corrupted. I mean, that's purely speculation on my point. But this Bill Barr was heavily invested in going around the globe to supposedly put to rest the question of 2016, which is not being litigated. And I mean, it's not being litigated in the courts. It's not being litigated in the court of public opinion anymore. Right? I mean, I don't think the Democrats should have abandoned the Mueller report, but they seem to have. So why were they so adamant, supposedly looking for what really happened in 2016? And we're going to get this report soon. But I think that they were trying to set up some type of narrative that it's happening in the future against Donald Trump. But here is Bill Barr talking about how offensive it is that there's any congressional oversight of the executive branch of government.
Unfortunately, just in the past few years, we have seen these conflicts take on an entirely new character. Immediately after President Trump won election, opponents inaugurated what they called the resistance. And they rallied around an explicit strategy of using every tool and maneuver to sabotage the functioning of the executive branch and his administration. The fact of the matter is that in waging a scorched earth, no-holds-barred war of resistance against this administration, it is the left that is engaged in the systematic shredding of norms and undermining the rule of law.
This is such a disingenuous reading of history. Mitch McConnell on day one said we're going to obstruct everything. They said they were going to obstruct everything. And they did. They obstructed everything. Mitch McConnell even refused to allow Obama to give warning to the states about Russian interference in the election, which at that time was like, we're getting reports that they're touching the voting registries. Mitch McConnell refused to hold a nomination hearing for Barack Obama's Supreme Court pick. The idea that the erosion of norms started with the resistance, which was basically just a marketing thing to sell T-shirts to people who didn't like Donald Trump. That would be like Barack Obama coming out and talking about, I think that was literally at the beginning of Sean Hannity's show in 2009. they would say, we're the resistance. We're conservatives in exile. And like that would be having Eric Holder come out and cite that as the nation's problems. It's stunning. And really the important part is less about the relevance of him saying it in terms of how it impacts our society. It's really more relevant because it gives you a clue as to where this guy's head's at and what he's willing to do when push comes to shove. He's the chief law enforcement officer of the country. The OLC it's not quite the Supreme Court, but I'll remind you, there is never been a ruling by the Supreme Court as to whether a sitting president can be indicted. That only comes out of the Office of Legal Counsel, which is part of the Justice Department, where he used to sit during the George Herbert Walker Bush years, and where the torture memos came from. So anything the Supreme Court does not deal with, the U.S. government's chief law enforcement agency basically follows the policy that they make up. And if you think the OLC is somehow insulated from this, from the political influence of the White House, just look to the guy who's in charge of the OLC, who is now talking about the Democrats' resistance is sabotaging Donald Trump.
If only.
Indeed. We should be so lucky. Should we get to this thing where Sam Harris called me psychopathic? Let's talk about this because apparently they wanted me to, and I will. So this guy, Eric Weinstein, is a member of the IDW. He works for Peter Thiel as one of his economists. He's self-identifies as a longtime liberal who is disaffected like Dave Rubin and how authoritarian the left has become or whatnot. He went on Joe Rogan, and we played that clip, said that I was leading a band of people who were trying to take out Dave Rubin like a wounded caribou or something to that effect. Which, I guess if you want to do a shorthand, that's probably accurate. I mean, not take out. All I wanted was to make sure that he was properly defined, so that when mostly young adults and kids come across Dave Rubin's animated shows that were paid for by PragerU or whatever it is, that they understand that his perspective is actually of the right. And subsequent to that, he started working for Turning Points USA, which is a right-wing college organization. Subsequent to that, he worked for The Blaze. And I don't know how any self-respecting, even someone who is attempting to pretend to care about genuine intellectual discourse, would associate themselves with Glenn Beck. Honestly. Like, I don't even know how you can pretend to do that. I understand how you can pretend. I just don't understand how you can pretend and think you're going to get away with it by being on The Blaze.
Wait, I thought Glenn Beck was woke now.
Even if he's woke, the idea that you're going to try and brand yourself as some type of like intellectual stuff is the most important thing. But no, he's unwoke. He went through that cycle. It took
did not
a year.
last long.
Took a year. And so Eric Weinstein has a podcast. I don't know who's been on the portal, but I presume it's been the same. You know, they have a coffee clatch where all these same guys, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, Eric Weinstein, Sam Harris, they all go on each other's podcasts and tell each other how deeply intellectual they are and how they are arguing in good faith. And that's the most important thing.
Peter Thiel was the first guest, and the whole conversation was like, how do we have this conversation given that we have different views? And the answer is, Peter Thiel is your boss.
Right. I mean, like the idea that they're actually exploring something is sort of fascinating, that they maintain this fiction for themselves. Right. And it's not just that they maintain that fiction for themselves. I mean, anybody can delude themselves if you want.
Well, they're exploring how unfair it is that nobody likes them.
Well, it's also that they're convincing themselves that there's something that they really aren't. And they're also attempting, obviously, to convince everyone else. But, you know, that's what they're doing. And it's all this sort of like overly intellectual. Now, after his appearance on Rogan, I tweeted something at him. I can't remember what it was. We had some exchange, and we ended up on the phone. Because and I'm not whining about this. They're certainly the prerogative. But as you know, Dave Rubin refused to have me on his show, even though he claimed he was about to, because Michael did a video about him that was labeled by our YouTube person as being calling Dave Rubin stupid. And so I apologized to Rubin publicly. I pulled the video down. But Rubin said, that's why I'm not going to have you on the show, because you're beyond the pale. Calling me stupid is beyond the pale. Now, of course, Dave has since now said that it's okay for Donald Trump to call him a fag. I'm sorry, I'm just using the word that he used. And you can be on my show. He's invited people who he claims slandered or libeled him onto his show. But because Michael did a video that we put in the title, it says Dave Rubin's stupid, that becomes his excuse not to engage with me.
Well, we all know being an intellectual is a cornerstone of his identity, whereas being gay is kind of an afterthought.
Right. But nevertheless, I apologized. And we took the video down.
And that video doesn't exist anymore.
That video does not exist anymore. Now, people can argue whether or not I should have done that, but I wanted to make it clear that I thought Dave was being a little disingenuous, that he just wanted to avoid an actual debate. Eric Weinstein. We spoke on the phone for an hour. Why? Not because I'm really interested in talking to Eric Weinstein, not because I don't have a bunch of other things to do, but because I want to make it clear that at the very least, I'm coming from a sincere set of beliefs and that I have an agenda that I'm perfectly willing to articulate to him, just as I've articulated to you. I wanted to make sure that Dave Rubin was not labeled as the last liberal or whatever it was he was trying to call himself, that he was actually being honest and above board with what his agenda was. And that was to mainstream some ideas that were right-wing ideas, and he was sort of mislabeling us. I mean, he told Stefan Molyneux, you and I represent the new center. That's not, by any definition, that's not true. And I was just engaging with that definition. And I do the same thing with Sam Harris and whatnot. Remember, Sam Harris, when I first got into it with Sam Harris, it was years ago, and it was about a piece he wrote in the Huffington Post called In Defense of Torture. Literally. In defense of torture. He wrote it on the Huffington Post, which you have to understand, particularly at that time, I think it was 2005, was it? Was the premier political website in the country for anybody who was left of Matt Drudge. It was the marquee site, a political site. And now Harris since linked back to a post on his, blog saying people misunderstood this thing in defense of torture. This is not where an editor, incidentally, comes in with the title. You write your own titles at that time for Huffington Post. I don't know what they do now. And there was a massive debate in this country about torture at that time. Political debate. He was trying to just do a thought experiment. And we went back and forth on that thought experiment on Twitter. And for him, the thought experiment is completely narrow. It's actually indicative of a lot of his problems, is that he doesn't see a broader context to anything he's talking about. Whatever is just in his mind is, get some type of pass, even though he wants to broadcast it on Huffington Post. Like it has no implications. Like coming out and writing in defense of torture is not a political act, even if it's done on a premier political website. So this guy is on with Eric Weinstein and apparently thinks that my behavior is psychopathic. Play it.
You know, Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals.
Rules for radicals.
The focus on ridicule. I think it's hard to remember, like Country Joe and the Fish was ridiculing a bad war in terms that are ridiculous. You've now got a group of people who, if a mathematician says, you know that in different arithmetics, you could have an equation like 2 + 3 = 1. And so then you get somebody saying,
now, incidentally, he is the reason why he's saying mathematicians is he wants to pretend and have the listener believe that when we talk about Sam Harris trying to mainstream race IQ garbage, that's like attacking math. That's why he's doing it. That's why he's saying mathematician. He's not saying when we have people who come on and talk about eugenics, or when we have people who come on and talk about killing babies, or it's math. It's math. I'm attacking people because they're doing math properly. That's what it is, according to the perspective that they have.
Looking over there at Princeton, but well, that's ridicule. But you're ridiculing something that you strawmanned and didn't understand,
right?
Because the person actually was making sense. And so what I see is that the left, and in particular the Sam Seder crowd, has doing
that with abandon.
Well, it's willing to do two separate things. Sam is quite willing. Like there's this whole thing about, will you talk to Sam Seder? Will you debate Sam Seder? And my feeling is, I would debate part of Sam Seder, the part that just is focused on the ideas, but the part that is kind of like nasty and ridiculing and doing the Alinsky thing, I don't know what to do with it. I'm not interested. I've spoken to Sam Seder on the phone. It's perfectly reasonable, made sense to me. We disagreed on positions, but
well, the line that gets crossed from me always.
Now just think about the mentality of someone who is going to say it's perfectly reasonable, but there are aspects of Sam I don't like, and so therefore, despite the fact that my entire brand is built upon this idea of exchange of ideas, because there's things about Sam that I don't understand or appreciate, I'm not going to have a public discourse about it. I'm just going to give you, Sam Harris, an opportunity to call him psychopathic in the way that he acts.
Reasonable, made sense to me. We disagreed on positions, but
well, the line that gets crossed for me always with these guys, and again, it's disproportionately on the left, is the line of conscious dishonesty. I mean, it's your brother's aphorism: bad faith changes everything.
Bad faith changes everything.
And I mean, these guys are in bad faith. They know they're lying about, in my case, my views, my actual beliefs, and
not all of them.
There's just too much information.
Well, David Pakman.
No, David Pakman's fine. I just did his podcast.
Yeah, I know. But David Pakman said some pretty non-charitable things in some parts that seemed kind of ridiculing. And I think me, other people.
Well, I've never seen him misrepresenting my views. And I think, I don't know him. I just did his podcast once, but he seems like somebody who, if I said, listen, you got me wrong here, that would matter, and he would make an effort to get me
and that's
get me
the
right.
thing, which is the problem that we have increasingly is that the tactics that are being used in what are called progressive circles have been confused with the content. So that is, the objections to the vehicle, which might be Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, is conflated with the
totally
payload.
Unethical.
Pause it. So in other words, unless you're willing to take what I say in the way that I want you to say it, you're acting in bad faith. And here's the little trick that they're going to play. If you're not willing to take what I say in the way that I want you to take it, then I'm going to deem you unworthy of actually having an exchange with me. And therefore, I can't be accused of being less than intellectually curious as I am, because you're not even, you are not part of a caste that is really one that you could measure. So I am having all critics come at me. I just am defining critics in a narrow way that doesn't include people who won't accept what I say is the gospel. Continue.
Program for smearing people dishonestly.
Well, it's an amoral technology.
Well, no, it's an ends justify the means.
That's the big problem on the left.
Yeah. So, but that ethic is flawed, right? So for instance, I mean, like with me and Trump, like there's nobody who
you don't like the guy
denigrates Trump as avidly as I do, but I am super careful, to be honest. Right. So it's not that anything you can smear him with is fair.
Because
right?
you can be, Sam. I mean, the problem with
all these guys can be. Sam Seder can be honest on his show and still have a show. Right. Nobody's going to cancel him because he was too honest.
No, I think that there's
I take phone calls every day. I take IMs every day. If anybody wants to debate me, I go and debate them. If anybody wants to show and point out where I've been dishonest, it's the way you get to the front of the line on these calls.
Accountability.
Totally. But I am being dishonest about Donald Trump or about Sam Harris. Maybe both.
Like this very weird other, I mean, I don't want to get into the Sam Seder thing in particular. First of all, because he's going to do an entire show. We know you have to say.
Yeah. He'll take these quotations and
but he has. See,
I will. And if you have a problem with it, invite me onto your show. Come on to my show. Let's go. We'll go to the Y, wherever you want to go. 92nd Street Y. We can have a debate about it. Oh, but I understand. I'm psychopathic in my behavior and therefore not worthy of actually having some discourse. So you're going to bring me up on your show repeatedly, but we can't really.
And he'll probably respond to this too.
Right. Of course. Of course he will, because that's the kind of stuff he does. Continue.
He has Pacman's ability to reason. I mean,
this is the banality of evil, right? Like there's not that many evil people, right? There's just a lot of people who are functioning in some normal mode with normal incentives, and they become assholes because they're not heroes, right? But so it takes some work not to be an asshole when you are incentivized to be one. And
now I'll tell you something. You can look at our show and make an assessment, whether it's on YouTube, like the format of this program, the rigor that we demand on this program. You can look at our numbers and see why it's taken so long for this show to grow, and just even the number of views that we get on YouTube. And I should add, The Banality of Evil, incidentally, was a book written by Hannah Arendt about the Adolf Eichmann trial. And yes, there were sort of some broader lessons, but it's an interesting thing to bring up in the context of explaining me that what I'm doing is evil.
And in the context of defending people who do race science.
Right.
From
right.
meanness.
It's a little bit coincidence.
Sam said Charles Murray was the most unfairly maligned man of his lifetime.
It's evil of me to malign him. It's just like, or let's put it this way. If someone was going to do a book on me, they would title it in the same way you would title, let's say, what Adolf Eichmann did, who basically arranged the trains for the Holocaust. Let's play another segment, because even though I'm going to do a whole show on it, they spent, I don't know, about 20 minutes returning to the problem of the evil Sam Seder.
But they don't want to talk about you, though.
I understand. I'm forcing them to.
Just backing up everything, slowing it down, trying to listen. You know, Ben and I have gotten sideways a few times. To his
talking
credit,
about Ben
every
Shapiro.
time I take something to Ben Shapiro, he'll think better of himself, and he'll come.
Yeah, no, I mean that's my experience as well.
Even though red meat is part of his business model.
Yeah. No, that counts for a lot. So the place where we've reached some kind of bad faith singularity.
Right.
Is where I think, okay, there's like, we just have to cut our losses. There's no conversation. Like, that's why I would never talk to Sam Seder in a public forum. He's proven himself so committed to the singularity. I mean, it's like there's a bunch of, there's maybe 20 people who are just on this part of the landscape where there's no coming back from it. I mean, there's coming, obviously there's an appropriate, any conversation that would have to happen would have to begin with an actual apology. I'm like, it's just so bad. There's no alternate movie version that's exculpatory, right? These people know they're lying. They're avidly lying. It's all malicious. It's all Saul Alinsky. It's all just smear because it works.
It is Saul Alinsky.
Right.
But look, the best that can be said for it, and again, I don't get along with it,
right,
is I believe that they think that they're in desperate times, and they believe that desperate times call for desperate measures. And that's sort of the mindset, which is the ridicule is necessary to stop a greater evil. And that entitlement, as soon as you start experimenting.
But ridicule is not the problem. It's the line that's the problem. It's right. You can if it's an honest joke at somebody's expense.
I've probably watched 45 minutes of Sam Seder total.
Yeah, well, that's more than I've watched, but I've watched enough to know that these.
Pause it. So these two guys, after talking about me over the course of 10, 15 minutes, saying that I am singularly, there's 20 of us who are singularly liars, so beyond the pale that we can't even be taught. We're like the untouchables. And they have based this
like bad faith
on between the two of them on almost, not quite, 90 minutes worth of video that they have supposedly watched. I would bet that it's even less.
Well, they've also read Saul Alinsky.
And they've read Saul Alinsky.
To be fair, you did name your son after him.
That is also true, actually. There's no doubt in my mind they've read more Saul Alinsky than I have.
Then maybe anybody. I've read a lot of books. I've never read Saul Alinsky.
But and the last time you heard this was actually when what's her face? I can't even remember. Palin. This was the big Palin talking point, the Tea Party talking point. They're all reading Saul Alinsky. I have never read Saul Alinsky. But be that as it may, the idea that I'm such a singular liar and the fact that they could be so sure of this after watching almost 90 minutes of my videos combined, when we do every day a 2.5 hour show. I've done over 2,000 shows. Maybe we're up to 3,000 shows. That is pretty stunning.
I wonder if between the two,
that's like math, as Eric would say.
I wonder if they could link to one of those segments between the two of them.
One maybe say what some of the lies actually are.
You'd think you'd have at least one lie that would be there.
If it's so easy in 45 minutes, you can find one. Let's find one.
Yeah, I'm curious. You don't have to, it's not like you have to look through a haystack, and they're not apparently needles. You're 45 minutes, and I've got it. If I'm a singular lying force, that should be fairly easy to present.
The bad faith singularity.
Exactly. Continue. I'm just curious as to where this is going. Oh, I know where it's going. I'm psychopathic.
But ridicule is not the problem. It's the line that's the problem. It's right. You can if it's an honest joke at somebody's expense.
I've probably watched 45 minutes of Sam Seder total.
Yeah, well, that's more than I've watched, but I've watched enough to know that these are people who, when they're trafficking in audio of my podcast that's been edited to show the opposite of what I was saying, and they get 1,000 blistering comments telling them about this, they keep the audio up, or they don't. Well, they never correct an error.
I agree, but that's what's coming out of it.
That's psychopathic behavior. It's like whether or not they're psychopaths, they're acting like psychopaths.
But then we've got a giant chunk of our world, and in part a lot of the.
Wow, there you go. Psychopathic behavior. What audio podcast have we played of his that we have cut up or somebody's cut up the audio that is false?
If people want to check how we treated his conversation with Ezra Klein over Charles Murray, we took a lot of audio from that. So, I think we did a pretty good job with it.
They seem like...
We manufactured Ezra Klein's voice in that one, though. That was a big mistake. We shouldn't have done that.
Well, they're intentionally conflating what they might perceive as ad hominem attacks with actual arguments. And they're saying because you make what they see as ad hominem attacks or ridicule in addition to actual arguments, that invalidates your arguments. But as we learned from Ben Burgess, the two actually have very little relationship to one another. You can be a total dick and still be right.
Yeah, exactly. I have no, I'm not going to try and argue that I'm not a total dick. But the idea that they build their whole foundation of who they are on this notion of I'm going to have Murray on my podcast just because other people are criticizing him. I'm going to have race-based IQ science and feature it to hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. That's okay. But a guy who's rude or I pretend lies, the reason why they label me this in this way is because they don't want to actually have an exchange of ideas with someone who vehemently disagrees with some of the positions they've taken. That's why they do this. And the only way they can justify it to their audience is to claim that I'm beyond the pale.
And even if we want to take this away from you for a second, Sam Harris also said he won't talk to Ta-Nehisi Coates because he plays the race card too much.
Ta-Nehisi Coates also, I'm sure, spends a lot of time editing Sam Harris's podcast. And as much as Sam Harris wanted that apology, I apologize to Dave Rubin. Where's the critique of Dave Rubin? I mean, it's unbelievable. And the idea, these guys, they will only do this. Like, you know, there's a reason why Eric Weinstein pulled a clip from our show when Billy Bragg was on and went and said, I want to debate you, Billy Bragg. I want to come on your stage at one of your music shows to debate you. And I was like, Eric, why don't you debate me? You and I had an hour-long conversation on the phone that ostensibly was a prelude to you seeing if I was worthy of having an exchange of ideas. But the thing is, for these guys, you have to have a platform that you're going to be able to leverage to bring you more celebrity or more money. That's the two things that they require. And they all know that I do not represent that to them. That they don't have an ability. Like, I'll go to someone who's not involved in politics, or I should say is not, their politics is, their audience is not as politically aware. They're just politically aware enough that I can reach them. So I can go on stage with Billy Bragg, and there's going to be some segment out there where I'm going to seem reasonable to. But if I go into Sam Seder's show, there's a chance that I won't be able to milk anybody from that. Or if Sam Seder comes on my show, I'm not going to be able to I'm going to be questioned about things that I don't want to be questioned about. I'm going to be put on a spot where I don't want to be put on a spot. And so what we have to do is deem, it's not just me. There's others. I'm sure they do this too. I have to deem him an untouchable. And therefore, I can totally dismiss the idea of having any exchange with him. People can go back and look at what the first exchange I had with Sam Harris on Twitter was. See what they think. This is a guy, incidentally, who publishes, when he had an exchange with Chomsky, he wanted to debate Chomsky badly. And he had a private exchange with Chomsky. He said, do you mind if I publish these things? Chomsky said, yeah, I don't think it's appropriate. That's not what we're doing here. And then he went ahead and published them. That seemingly is. But that's not bad faith. That's good faith.
That's the good faith singularity.
That's the singularity of good faith. The world deserves to know my private exchange with you. Unbelievable. Let's go to the phones.
Clowns.
Real clowns. I'm sorry, I don't mean to ridicule.
Oh, sorry.
Calling from a 267 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Sam.
Yes. Who's this?
Hi, my name's Connor. I'm calling from Doylestown, Pennsylvania.
Connor from Pennsylvania. What's on your mind?
I just wanted to thank you guys for everything. I actually just ran a campaign here in Bucks County, and you may not remember, but back in like February or so, I called in and I asked you for advice because I'm only 23.
Wow.
But so I wanted to run a campaign, and I decided to do it with your advice of just leaning into it. Don't worry about your age, and I came up 38 votes short of flipping Doylestown. Yeah, I know. Flipping Doylestown Township, which is a historically controlled Republican area. So I just wanted to thank you guys for that, and I'm happy that I was part of the movement here in Bucks County. But I also got my own attack poster, which I sent it to you guys on Twitter, and I thought it was pretty cool because I'm not a socialist or anything, but they attacked me with the hammer and sickle and all that stuff. So
nice.
It showed that we were really, it showed that we were really calling them out, and they were afraid of us. So I came pretty close, but.
Well, that's awesome, man. 38 votes. That's got to hurt. I've been there, losing not a citywide, but college. I ran for stuff and lost by a handful of votes, like 12 votes. It kills. But that's good for you, man. Well, next time.
Yeah, I'm looking for the next opportunity. I actually just am done with my I've been working 4 jobs while I ran my campaign.
Jeez.
I lost 2 of them on Friday, so I'm looking for my next opportunity. So I've applied to all the Sanders campaign jobs that are open. I'm willing to relocate anywhere. I'm just trying to find that next opportunity to make the movement happen, So I guess if there's anyone out there listening, I live in Pennsylvania's 1st congressional district, so I'm trying to work on flipping that as well. I'm not old enough to run, but I can help somebody else, I suppose.
Wow. Well, do you know Mike from PA? Do you know who he is?
I have. Yeah, I've reached out to him. He unfortunately couldn't talk to me before my election. I tried to get a conversation with him going, but I live, I mean, not to dox him. I live pretty close to him.
All right.
So I knew of him, but.
All right. Well, I would reach out to, again, see what the story is, and maybe he can, point you in the right direction.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys again, and keep doing what you're doing. A lot of my ideology stems from the interviews you guys do and the books and the authors that you guys have on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for the call. It's very nice. Keep doing it.
Of course. Take care.
It's awesome. It's pretty exciting.
When are they going to give up on that Red Scare BS?
I mean, at one point it just becomes like, yeah, just keep doing that. Because it sort of has that flavor of like, when they were doing Chicago style politics with Obama.
They got nothing.
It was, people were just like, what? Wait, I don't get it. What's Chicago style politics? Because at one point people forget.
Is it like Chicago pizza?
It's like deep politics, I guess.
Deep and kind of gross.
Calling from an 845 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, is it me?
It is you.
Oh, hi, I'm John from upstate New York.
John from upstate New York. What's on your mind, John?
Well, I've thought about this a lot, and I'm not sure how to ask this question without telling a brief story, so I apologize for that.
Okay.
But a few months back, I was at work talking to a coworker, and he had some pretty left-leaning ideas, taxing the rich, expanding social safety nets, et cetera, et cetera. And then when he asked me what podcast I was listening to, I hadn't started listening to you guys yet. I mentioned I was listening to the last podcast on the left, and he immediately said, I don't listen to anything on the left. And while that's a true crime podcast and nothing to do with politics, how do we reach people who have left-leaning ideas and just have this internalized prejudice against the word left or liberal or whatever the heck you want to call us?
I mean, one of the biggest mistakes that I thought that Air America did at the time was to call itself a left-leaning instead of saying independent. I mean, I think people just don't like, broadly speaking, to be characterized and feel like they're being labeled in some fashion. And there's been a long sort of history of demonizing the left. And this we're talking about the hammer and sickle. I don't think that image has the salience it did 25 years ago, but I mean, that's to a certain extent.
So I don't know what that thing is.
20 exactly. I mean, to a certain extent, when we launched this program on Air America, part of the reason why I called it a Majority Report was because I wanted it just to be about like the idea. This is, we represent the views of the majority of people. The majority of people who voted for one candidate over another in the 2000 election. It was all that. I mean, so. You should listen to this politics podcast that I listen to. They really just, it's a little bit weedy, but interesting. That's the way I would pitch it. And I think over time, I think, there's going to be a change in that. I mean, I think it's already happening, and I think it's going to be hard to say, I listen to a conservative podcast or whatever it is in the years to come, frankly. But I mean, I think there is still just a knee-jerk response. There's a lot of places where, there's been some branding failures, frankly.
Okay. Thanks so much.
I appreciate the call.
Bye.
Bye. There you go. There's no doubt. I mean, I can't remember who I was talking to the other day. I was like, when I started in this business, if you were called a liberal, it was an epithet from the right. Now it's generally from the left.
It's about both these days.
Both, probably still both.
Love me, love me, love me, I'm a liberal. That's an old song.
Yes, it's true. Well, it's not to say that it's a new thing, but it was, you were not hearing that sentiment in any, I mean, of course there was still.
I don't think I became aware of the distinction between liberal and left until like 5 or so years ago.
Yeah, I mean, like Henwood was around and you would hear Henwood say that stuff, but I don't even know if Henwood would frame it in that way at that time. Mort Saul, I remember he came on the show and he's like, I'm a radical. You guys are a liberal. And Janine and I were both like, I felt like I sort of had more of a basis just in terms of what I had studied in college to sort of, process what he was saying. But in that era, it was just like, what? What do you mean? There is no radical movement that exists.
I think it goes in cycles. And I think when you were first doing this, that cycle was definitely in an ebb. But we have seen it at previous points in history.
Of course. Without a doubt. But in like the 25 years of politics in the 20th century. I mean, I spent several hours with Abby Hoffman when he was on his tour in the 80s. And he was saying like right now is like 1968. And I just remember thinking like, no, it's not. Like I was 2 in 1968 and I understand, but I have an understanding and I'm like, I'm looking around and I'm going, no, it's not. And and I think there's a legit critique of his politics that no one was making. I will tell you that the most left people on the campus were simpatico with him. There was no one making, and I mean, I took economics from, I think a guy who was self-described Marxist. And there was just simply no one on campus in the mid-'80s who, I mean, you could always find 1 or 2 people, but there was nobody, the leftist of the left on that campus was not using this type of ideological framework, I would say, that is much more prevalent today. But let's get back to some of the oldies, shall we? Here's Joe Biden trying to establish for people that not only does he have ideas that are immovable from 20 or 30 years ago, but that he's going to grasp them so tightly that he's willing to lose an election. The idea that you would represent the Democratic Party, even the Republican Party for that matter, but the Democratic Party, and make the argument that pot is a gateway drug is stunning. Like, this is, put aside the failure of doing any type of like legit research or reading about legit research. How about just politics?
First question is, has your stance on recreational marijuana changed? And my second question is, do you mind signing a poster for me and my mom?
I'll be happy to sign a poster when this is over. And no, it hasn't changed. I think states should be able to make a judgment to legalize marijuana. I agree with, I think that's okay. But let me tell you, the truth of the matter is, there's not nearly been enough evidence that has been acquired as to whether or not it is a gateway drug. It's a debate. And I want a lot more, before I legalize it nationally, I want to make sure we know a lot more about the science behind it. That's why I want to move it from a Schedule 2 drug, a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3, so you can in fact do this. I support use of medical marijuana, but here's the deal. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody who's been convicted, it should not be a crime. It should be, to the extent that it exists, and anyone ever been convicted of the use of marijuana and put in jail, they should be immediately released. Their record should immediately be expunged, immediately. And but here's the deal. It is not irrational to do more scientific investigation to determine, which we have not done significantly enough, whether or not there are any things that relate to whether it's a gateway drug or not. I don't know enough to know whether it is, although I've done a great deal of work on the drug side.
Oh my God, can we stop this? This is so contradictory and incoherent. It's a dangerous substance because it could be a gateway drug, but I'm fine with states okaying it. It's a dangerous substance, but I'm okay with medical marijuana. We have no idea what the impact of this is, but I don't think anybody should go to jail for it. And I have no way of knowing if it's a gateway drug, even though I've been heavily involved in all this stuff. This is the problem with it. Like, I'm not saying that this guy should be out there, up there with Snoop and I'm going to blow a blunt every time I go out in front. But just have a coherent response to this. Because again, he thinks he's playing to these people who just have a vague investment in this. They just want to hear the words that you won't legalize it federally, but you're not going to turn off all of the other people who are like in states and seeing that it's not that problematic. Like, look, in Colorado, it has been legalized for what now? 3 or 4 years? There's no evidence whatsoever that there's a gateway drug. However, I can tell you that, what's a gateway drug? OxyContin. That's a gateway drug. In fact, we have tens of thousands of people dying every year, which is evidence of that. But guess what? OxyContin, legal. And the list goes on and on. I mean, the idea that you need this overly rigorous testing to determine this one sociological factor. You don't think drinking is a gateway drug? Of course it is. I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd. And the problem is not just that he's wrong on the science and this and that. I mean, like, I can understand if there was some type of political value to it. But
Well, he's trying to have it both ways, right?
Exactly. That's my point. Is that it's really just a garbled mess.
He's hoping that some people hear some of the things he said, and the other people who like the other things he said only hear the other things.
And the problem is with that theory is that we do not live in an environment like that anymore, where something that you say across the country can be heard by just as many people on all four corners of the country. And you can't get away with that. He's still living in an era where it's like, I did it on local television. Nobody's ever going to see it.
Just pull different parts of the quote for different audiences.
Exactly. It doesn't work anymore. And that's why, that's the scary part about Joe Biden, is that's the type of thing that will maybe get you a plurality in a primary where people think that you have some type of special power over elections and winning, and because you're associated with Obama. But when it comes time to actually having people who are going to go out and knock on doors and make sure that what happened to Hillary Clinton, like we talked about today in the interview in Pennsylvania, is not going to happen to you, those people aren't going to show up, because all you've done is not done anything to quite offend anybody. But you haven't done anything to inspire anybody. You haven't done anything that is actually like showing any type of, even Bill Clinton knew strong and wrong was better than right and fright, or whatever the other half of that was. I don't know.
Yeah, there were people who were excited to get out there for Hillary, believe it or not. And I don't think that constituency exists for Biden.
But you know what? There was but it wasn't nearly enough. And their passion was not nearly as intense. But I would agree with you. Biden's got even less.
At least Hillary, like, the reason I felt I don't know if excited is a word, but about my vote for Hillary is like, she's going to be the first woman president, I thought at that time.
Yes, that was an important, I think that's an important milestone for a country to pass. I think in many respects, we need to get past a lot of this stuff to some extent, even if it's just like representative and performative, to move on to the other problems. I know that, there's competing theories as to which, what is the progression of those, what is the sequencing of those things. But so it's been announced by the new self-declared president that she, because this is not a coup and not a military coup, will be arresting the members of the MAS party, which is the Evo Morales' party. They control 2/3 of the Bolivian legislature. They will be arrested. That's supposedly what the promise has been by the president of Bolivia. Because as you know, in a democracy, if the leader of your party is removed by the military, you're automatically arrested by the president who comes in if she's a theocrat and does not want any indigenous people in her government.
That's what the nuance tells us.
That's what the nuance of the situation tells us. Now, again, I can understand people have different opinions about Evo Morales. And I don't know that I'm qualified to make an exact assessment as to, I have my opinion that based upon your median leader of Latin American countries, that he helped a very broad-based group of people that you don't see in those situations. And that's broadly a positive. But regardless of what your perspective on Evo Morales is, the idea that this wasn't a coup is absurd. It basically means that the word has no meaning if you cannot call this a coup. And it's important that our leaders make this clear, because we have outsized influence in these countries and in this hemisphere. And that's why this was so encouraging to see. And I would like to see others in the Democratic race follow suit, frankly. But here is Bernie Sanders talking to Jorge Ramos in a Real America Univision town hall.
You wrote in a tweet that you thought it was a military coup what happened in Bolivia. Many people have other point of view. They think that Evo Morales had been in power 14 years, that he wanted to fight more, and that he wanted to become a dictator. So what do you think?
No, I don't agree with that assertion. I think Morales did a very good job in alleviating poverty, in giving the indigenous people of Bolivia a voice that they never had before. Now, we can argue about his going for a fourth term, whether that was a wise thing to do.
And they always thought it was a fraud, the election on October the 20th.
Some people think that as well. But at the end of the day, it was the military who intervened in that process and asked them to leave. When the military intervenes, Jorge, in my view, that's called a coup.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you all.
And not only that, the newly installed government, installed by the military, made a proclamation the other day that essentially the police were not to be held accountable for anything they do in putting down any potential unrest as a function of this coup. Remember now, the coup that's justified because this sitting elected president, who still, regardless of whether you think that he could have legitimately run for another term or not, he was still the legitimately elected president when he was ousted. His term ran to December. And if you thought that you were concerned he was becoming a dictator, what does a dictator look like? Does it look like when you tell the police the gloves are off, you won't be held accountable, and the next day 8 or 9 protesters are dead? You get this type of stuff? Here's a reporter on the ground, Teresa Bo from Al Jazeera. She's in La Paz, Bolivia. And here's what happens to her.
As the demonstrations got underway in La Paz on Friday, Al Jazeera correspondent Teresa Bo got caught up herself in the unrest.
Soy turista, no soy turista. Y usted la policía. I was just thrown tear gas by the police on purpose. This is what's happening in the middle of a plaza where people have been protesting peacefully. A police officer just threw tear gas on my eyes, so it's extremely difficult to speak. Very, very sorry. There's been protesters. There's dozens of police officers here. They just threw tear gas right in my eyes. They passed through and threw tear gas in my eyes. There's been people protesting here, trying to make it to the presidential palace. And there's been ongoing clashes with those who are defending Evo Morales.
I mean, there it is. I mean, those do not look like the police of a Democratic. I mean, it was quite clear. She's holding a microphone. There's a cameraman 5 feet in front of her. She's got a press pass. I don't know. There's 8 or 9 people killed now. They will not be held accountable. That's predetermined.
They'll blame Morales for this.
I mean, I don't know that there's really much that can be done from the United States, but it starts with people acknowledging what the heck is going on there. And it doesn't seem to be any major media outlet that is willing to do it. I mean, this is, talk about gaslighting. Are you serious?
Well, I mean, going forward, the United States, hypothetically, if it had an anti-imperialist as the executive, could stop meddling in other countries' elections and supporting right-wing dictators.
Indeed.
You got to do what JFK wanted to do to the CIA.
Just basically
scattered into 1,000 pieces.
We'll get to this Andrew stuff in a second. That's crazy. But I want to do this. Pete Buttigieg is in the lead in Iowa now. People have noted his 180-degree turn on Medicare for all. They see that as indicative of his complete lack of commitment to really anything other than winning. People have pointed out that he presented a Douglas plan, claimed to have all sorts of support from black leaders. And it turns out that the way that they established that support was to send an email out and said, we put your name on this report. If you don't want it there, respond within hours and we'll take it off. When you have to opt out of endorsements. That's interesting.
I like that system.
Then on top of that, to present the Douglas plan, they took a stock image of a photo of a woman and a boy that are in Kenya. Now, my understanding is that this plan has to do with the United States for black people in America, but it's so hard to find representations of black people in America that Kenya is sometimes the best place to look. But Julian Castro, who will not be on the debate stage on Wednesday night, has taken upon himself to basically ring the clarion call. And I know that at least one other candidate who has dropped out of the race, I just by fluke had a chance to talk to that person. They're all very skeptical of Pete Buttigieg. They disagree with, some of them disagree with Bernie Sanders, disagree with Elizabeth Warren. It's not about disagreement with Pete Buttigieg. It's about this guy has no core beliefs. He doesn't believe a thing. And here's Julian Castro making the argument. Now, understand, well, we'll talk about this in a moment.
I believe Mayor Buttigieg has a real problem with black voters because of his track record as mayor of South Bend. It's a bad track record with black voters. That was reflected in the policies that he put in place, in the relationship with the community there in South Bend. My concern is, are we really going to risk putting somebody at the top of the ticket who is not going to excite a big part of our base? To me, that's playing into Donald Trump's hands in 2020, because he won in 2016 based on the turnout of African Americans falling, particularly when it comes to communities like Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, that are in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. If you can't excite people and speak to the African American voter in a genuine way that's based on a track record, and it's too risky to be at the top of the ticket because we're risking another loss. And so my hope is that in the next 10 weeks that we're going to see some changes.
I share that hope.
It's even worse. I just read that at least 2 of the people that Buttigieg said endorsed him actually endorsed Bernie Sanders.
I mean,
there was a lot of confusion with that list.
That's because they didn't opt out of the endorsement process quick enough. You got to be responsible. If you get that email, if you get that bulk email, you got to opt out of the endorsement. It would be great if we did the voting that way too. If you don't opt out of voting for Pete Buttigieg, he wins. The one thing to keep in mind is that even if you think Pete Buttigieg is going to lose, his doing well in Iowa and New Hampshire, in some respects, helps, if you can believe it, Biden. Because the important thing for Joe Biden is to not be seen as a big loser in New Hampshire and Iowa. He's probably not going to win. He just doesn't want to be seen as such a big of a loser in those 2 states that it begins to undercut the foundations of his support in South Carolina, which are largely based on this perception that he's electable. If you have Buttigieg coming in first or second, if he comes in third, maybe it makes Biden look a little worse. But if he flattens basically the drop-off between the winner and the loser, it's going to help Joe Biden. At least the perception that he's not the big loser from that thing. But we'll see.
It's surprising to me that the Pete isn't able to get black support with the Pete Buttigieg dance.
Yeah, here's the Pete Buttigieg dance, the Iowa dancers.
Turn the music down because we don't want to get sued by Fall Out Boy, but look at that.
Yeah. Can we turn that down even more, the music? Yeah, just get it.
You don't really need the music, actually.
There you go.
You
It's probably better without it.
Terrifying.
Yeah. What is it with the dancing?
It's fun.
That's how you get to 20% in Iowa.
There you go. Exactly. You got to dance.
They're showing their grassroots energy.
They love corny dances in the Midwest.
Hey, speaking of people who are pretenders, do I still have that on my thing? I don't know if I still have that. Let's see if I get that. Oh, yeah, here it is. Okay. Here is Michael Bloomberg at the Christian Cultural Center in Brooklyn. He is about to enter the Democratic primary. And he's got some cleaning up to do first. He understands, just like Pete Buttigieg, that black voters are essential to not only a Democratic primary win, but also to a general election win. And so he's got to go to Brooklyn, say he was sorry for all those racist policies that he pursued. He understands it was a mistake.
Over time, I've come to understand something that I long struggled to admit to myself. I got something important wrong. I got something important really wrong. I didn't understand that back then, the full impact that stops were having on the Black and Latino communities. I was totally focused on saving lives, but as we know, good intentions aren't good enough. Now, hindsight is 20/20, but as crime continued to come down as we reduced stops, and as it continued to come down during the next administration, to its credit, I now see that we could and should have acted sooner and acted faster to cut the stops. I wish we had. I'm sorry that we didn't. But I can't change history. However, today, I want you to know that I realized back then I was wrong.
Okay. Here's the short answer I have for that.
And you, sir, you're a pretender.
Now, when he says back then, he was wrong. People should know that he was mayor until 2013. Really till January 1st of 2014. He was mayor from 2002 to 2013. So back then, he must be talking about like back then, right? Like 2013, 2014. Maybe he's talking like even a couple of years outside of the administration, like 2015 or 2016.
Saw de Blasio's example?
Yeah, he saw when de Blasio rolled it back and there was no change. Maybe it was around 2016. He waited for the data to come in and it seeped in. Or maybe it was 2017, just because he's a little bit slow. He wasn't paying attention. He was too caught up and he was too upset about Trump. And so he wasn't looking at the numbers and he didn't have that realization. I mean, maybe it could have been 2018. Because 2018, maybe like he said, after I'm mayor, I'm not going to think about anything for 5 years. Because it's the way I do things too. I'll say like, I'm not doing this for 5 minutes or 5 hours, something like that. 5 is a nice round number. Maybe it was 2018.
Get a fresh set of eyes on it.
Fresh set of eyes on it. When did he have this realization? Because it wasn't in 2019, or must have been in 2019, because in February 19th of 2019, and maybe it's been since there, but he had a response at the Naval Academy Leadership Conference where he spoke, where he didn't seem to think that there was a problem with stop and frisk. He seems to think it was a pretty good policy. Let's listen.
Good evening, sir. I'm Midshipman First Class Amanda Gana from 4th Company. Sir, earlier you said that discrimination to one is a threat to everyone. But there have been a lot of controversy surrounding your support of the policy stop and frisk that was mainly used by law enforcement to target African Americans and Hispanic Americans. Standing up here today, what would you say to those in the two communities that have been negatively affected by this policy that you supported in the past?
Well, we certainly did not pick somebody by race. The way stop and frisk worked was that you went to a place where there was somebody who had been murdered. What? And in that place, or recently in that place, and that's where you looked for kids that looked like they might have a gun. What we did was we focused on fighting the NRA. We focused on...
Pause it for one second. I just want to recap. You go to a place. Now, does that mean like a store? Like how narrowly defined is place? I think in this case, it's like boroughs or neighborhoods, right? Like, I mean, you go to sections of a city where there's been a murder and you see kids who look like they might be carrying a gun.
According to the cops.
What does it look like when you're carrying a gun? Like, what do you think the cues were that they might be carrying a gun?
Were they looking for bulges in people's pockets?
Could be bulges. It could be like, oh, that guy's walking weird. Or he's got a holster, like a Westerner, and he's got like 2 guns strapped to his side.
Maybe some spurs.
Yeah, I mean, now so far, I'm not hearing the part where he understands that it was problematic. That must be coming up in a second.
Was we focused on fighting the NRA. We focused on keeping kids from going through the correctional system where they just came out worse than they went in. Kids who walked around looking like they had a gun, removed the gun from their pockets to stop it. And the result of that was, over the years, the murder rate in New York City went from 650 a year down to 300 a year when I left.
Okay, now, that is something that is called correlation, not causation. Cops found firearms, guns, in 0.2% of their stops. Not 2% of their stops. Not 2 times out of every 100. 2 times out of every 1,000. 0.2%. That's how, apparently, they stopped all of the murders. Now, there's a lot of theories about why murders and violent crime dropped in New York and in almost every other major metropolitan city in the country during that period, and also internationally. One of the theories that I appreciate is that if you look 25 years, 23 years after leaded gasoline is outlawed, you see crime drop dramatically. I would bet in 15 years, 10 years, we're going to see crime go up in Flint, Michigan, just as they've now had 43% increase in special needs kids enrolling in elementary schools because of the lead crisis in the water there. And the idea that the combination of old lead pipes and a general atmospheric lead could push you over the edge in terms of neurological disorders seems to me to be... But again, that's also correlation, not necessarily causation, although lead we know is a neurotoxin. But nevertheless, getting back to the point, when did Mike Bloomberg have his transformation, his realization about stop and frisk? Was it really almost 7 years after he left office? Was it really almost half a dozen years after the first data came in to show that it wasn't necessary?
It was after all these people entered the primary.
It's so weird that it just happened. When did it happen? It must have happened it's conceivable 2 days after he did that, it could have happened. But it happened sometime between March 1st of this year and this weekend. I wonder what changed this weekend. I wonder what changed over those 5 or 6 months. That's assuming we can't find another area where he hadn't defended it before. I think that's going to be a problem for Mayor Mike.
Among other things.
Among other things. Here's a bad public relations move. apparently Prince Andrew, and he is what? He's Prince Charles's brother? Who is Prince Andrew? Do we not even know? You just know he's a prince?
Some limey Brit.
Some British guy who's royalty? Third child, second son of Queen Elizabeth. The guy who's never going to be king. So it's just like, whatever. What can I do? How badly could I possibly mess up? Well, he apparently was tied to Stephen Epstein.
Jeff Epstein.
Jeff Epstein. Who a serial child sex. There you go.
Not Siri.
Not Siri. Serial and convicted, right?
Yeah.
Child sex trafficker. And after his first conviction, Prince Andrew must have realized that he shouldn't hang out with him anymore. He's been accused by a woman of having of basically rape, right? As she was trafficked and more or less sold to him in some fashion. Here is where he is being questioned. This is a woman, Virginia Roberts, has an account of him, of their meeting and his essentially rape of her, I think, on BBC Newsnight with Emily Maitlis. Whoever decided that they should put this guy up there for this interview, I would not use their PR firm.
The problem was the fact that once he had been convicted,
you stayed with him.
I stayed with him, and that's the bit that as it were, I kick myself for on a daily basis, because it was not something that was becoming of a member of the royal family. And we try and uphold the highest standards and practices, and I let the side down. Simple as that.
Pause it. I let the side down by continuing to stay. Now, I don't know, maybe they don't get an allowance as the prince, and it's hard to go get a job because everybody's like, oh, dude, it's table 7 again. Whose table is that? It's Prince Andrew. Nobody can go tell him to go do it, so he just hangs out in the back. That's why nobody wants to hire him. He has no money. He has no ability. As a prince, you have no ability to go get a hotel because in New York, it's also
expensive.
It's expensive, and there's not that many hotels.
Yeah, that would want a royal there.
Yeah. There's not many hotels that welcome a royal person there to stay there, even for free. So, yes, I blew this one from my side.
You know, on Facebook, when you're like, hey, I'm rolling through Tennessee, does anybody have a place I can crash? And then a person you might not want offers their place. You kind of have to take it.
I didn't think about it. I didn't want to stay with the pedophile because, okay.
One of Epstein's accusers, Virginia Roberts, has made allegations against you. She says she met you in 2001. She says she dined with you, danced with you at Tramp nightclub in London. She went on to have sex with you in a house in Belgravia belonging to Ghislaine Maxwell, your friend. Your response?
I have no recollection of ever meeting this lady. None whatsoever.
You don't remember meeting her?
No.
Doesn't remember meeting her. She goes on to, apparently, Virginia Roberts gives a very sort of specific account of their meeting. That he, to be fair, parries with science.
And you profusely sweating, and that she went on to have baths, possibly.
There's a slight problem with the sweating because I have a peculiar medical condition, which is that I don't sweat, or I didn't sweat at the time, and that was yes, I didn't sweat at the time because I had suffered what I would describe as an overdose of adrenaline in the Falklands War when I was shot at, and I simply it was almost impossible for me to sweat, and it's only because I have done a number of things in the recent past, but I'm starting to be able to do that again. So I'm afraid to say that there's a medical condition that says that I didn't do it, so therefore.
Do we hear at the end like the reporter actually laughing?
I think that's the person who ripped the
Oh, okay, that's what
video.
it's got to be. That is pretty stunning. That is pretty stunning. And here is finally Prince Andrew saying that I can't quite tell if he's willing to take the oath.
I don't know if I'd say
testify.
willing.
But he understands that the law is the law, and well, if the sweating thing wasn't convoluted enough.
Testify or give a statement under oath if you were asked.
Well, I'm like everybody else. And I would have to take all the legal advice that there was before I was to do that sort of thing. But if push came to shove and the legal advice was to do so, then I would be duty-bound to do so.
Wow. I just, man, I guess it could have been worse if he had said like, well, I'm guilty.
He didn't pull his collar to one side and go, yeah.
I didn't really think this through. I'm not sure.
I think there was a big documentary on one of the UK networks into this that he sort of that sort of forced his hand in talking to the press. I don't think it went how, A+.
Can we cancel this now? I mean, I'm just trying to think of like worse responses that this guy could have given. Unbelievable. But there it is.
It's all going to come out.
Nothing wrong with monarchy. There you go. It's a pretty decrepit. All right, look, we have a lot of people who have been hanging on the phone for over 90 minutes. I only have time for one. I'm sorry, folks. We'll just take this one. Starts with a call from a 323 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hola, buenos días, Sam.
Buenos dias. Who's this?
Manuel Antonio from Los Angeles, California. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you? What's on your mind?
Pretty good. Can we talk about immigration real quick?
Sure.
So my family is from Guatemala, and I guess I just want to get your view on something that me and my friends have been discussing. I don't necessarily agree with this position, but I guess I want to know what you think or what y'all think. So like me and my buddies are thinking like, hey, so us people, I guess indigenous people who have been living here on this continent, for thousands of years. What do you think with the idea that we shouldn't be restricted to certain, borders, that we should be allowed to, cross from region to region without having to, adhere to these, border laws when our ancestors before, they had access to this, and then, Europeans came over and, did what they did, and then now we have to adhere to their laws. Like, what do you think about, like, us not being subject to those laws?
I can tell you that, and maybe I'll let Jamie speak for herself, but there are views that there should be no borders whatsoever. I am of the mind that we should not have militarized borders. I mean, I think to a certain extent, I think that having some form of border control is appropriate. I don't know that there is really a way to, I guess, reverse the fact that, this hemisphere has been colonized. And that I think that the countries as it is now, I think it's from a practical standpoint, I think it's legitimate to have borders. I happen to think that we should have, that we, at least in the United States, have the ability to absorb, at this point anyways, as many immigrants as are interested in coming. And that's not the same as saying that we shouldn't have borders, that we shouldn't have an ability to sort of like, have an awareness of, who's coming into the country and being able to survey. But I would, I believe that there should be a system to allow for citizenship for people as they come in so that they're not exploited, from a working standpoint, in other ways. But I mean, I understand the impetus for it. I don't know that, I would imagine, and I don't know the history enough, the pre-colonization history, but I would imagine that there's a lot of areas where people have been driven out of at different times. I don't know how you reverse these things. But I mean, that's my opinion on it.
I mean, I think you reverse these things with global socialism. Of course, I would say that, but it is true. I think you're pointing back to a history, I'm talking to the caller, of borders as a tool of colonialism and imperialism. And it's very much tied up with the development of early capitalism. And you're right to point out borders have not always existed in the way that they do now. The nation state is a relatively recent occurrence that arose from, conditions in history. And I think by studying that, we can denaturalize it and hopefully look ahead to a time when it can pass away again through historical conditions. But on a more general and current level, I think we need to be looking ahead to a world with open borders for everybody, not just indigenous people. Because right now what we have is open borders for capital and the ruling class, but the working class is very much controlled based on the needs of capital and the bosses. So in the short term, we can do things to advance a horizon of more open borders, like what Sam is saying, like demilitarizing the border, like decriminalizing migration, taking it away from the purview of the language of national security and law enforcement. We can have a path to citizenship, all of those things. And that goes hand in hand with an international working class movement, because every time that workers in the US have organized in coalition with non-native born workers, generally speaking, they've won. They've advanced the labor movement. And when they allow themselves to be divided along lines of nationality or citizenship or sex, race, anything, the labor movement has gotten weaker. So these things all go hand in hand.
Bueno, muchas gracias for taking my call. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
¿Cómo le está yendo con Babbel? I know you guys are trying to learn Spanish.
Sí. Chiquito.
No uso Babbel, pero yo oh God, I'm nervous now. Estoy tomando clases en español.
You're learning.
Sí, necesito practicar más.
Pretty good.
Sí, pero ya te entiendo. Muchas gracias por recibir mi llamada. Have a good day.
De nada. Buenos días.
Buenas tardes.
All right, folks. That's all the time we have for our program today. Here's the deal. We're starting tomorrow at 9 a.m. with the impeachment hearings. That's what we're going to be doing for the next 2 days. We're basically going to be doing impeachment hearings. We're going to probably do some other, maybe some other content, but nothing substantial. It's going to be primarily impeachment hearings. It is the fourth impeachment proceedings in the history of the country. And they are important, both in terms of maintaining some accountability for power, as narrowly tailored as it is. I think they're also important from a political standpoint, from a historical standpoint. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to cover them. You don't like it? Don't watch. If you do like it, watch. But we'll do it. I will endeavor not to speak too much over the the testimony, but we'll hopefully just, if there are moments where you may not know the background or the context of what's going on, I will tell you. All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive,